Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories.
Did you buy his confidence with true stories?
You buy his confidence and set him up. We've seen this happen recently with Jack Anderson, for example, who has his intelligence sources, and he has also admitted that he's been set up by them. You know, every fifth story just simply being false. You also work on their human vulnerabilities to recruit them in a classic sense, to make them your agent so that you can control what they do, so you don't have to set them up sort of, you know, by putting one over on them. So you can say, here, plant this one next Tuesday.
Can you do this with responsible reporters?
Yes, the Church Committee brought it out in 1975, and then Woodward and Bernstein put an article in Rolling Stone a couple of years later. 400 journalists cooperating with the CIA, including some of the biggest names in the business.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Thought that clip was good to share again today. We've seen it more than once. Many times we've heard similar conversations. It's not a secret, but very relevant to think about. But not just in the context of corporate media. Right? In any context, anybody you're watching, this show included, consider whether or not the information could be, without the awareness of the person doing it, influenced from some outside force. This is why we come at this with question everything. It's a very important mindset, with especially the way the world is today. Really, I think the way it's always pretty much been. We're just much more aware of it today, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're being hustled into some technocratic control structure. But very important to think about, not just the planning of false information, but how, as he said, ultimately control them. And I think more so today than ever in ways that they don't even realize. Just something to think about today. Not any real explicit points other than the usual that we point out. The different people that I think are in one way or another misinforming you, that are lying to you, or just flat out trying to achieve the agenda for the whatever we're talking about. The point is that I'm not sure in any of these contexts when we're covering it that I would never tell you I know the intent of the person, or that I can tell you how they feel, just simply that I see this as a manipulation. So ask yourself whether you think in the things we're discussing, whether this is somebody who is deliberately deceiving you or may not even be aware that they're doing it. And we had some interesting conversation this morning around the, which part was it? Specifically, I think the Dan Bongino, I have a couple clips on that today. But how interesting it is to see that it's not always as simple as saying that this person says the one thing, therefore they are, deliberately deceiving you. Frankly, I think it's far more nefarious from the person doing the deceiving, or surreptitious to people that aren't even aware that they're doing it, almost with plausible deniability. It's almost more dangerous, almost deserves more criticism. But it's important to think about, I think, because all it really does is show you at the end of the day that it's not about the source itself. It's about the data. It's about what you can prove, what you can see, the outcome of statements, not the statements themselves. That's the point. That's where we have to be with everything today. And I'm more and more really even training myself to be very harsh on that point. That, because we all have our people that we listen to, that we have, we see as more respectable, or they have credence, or, they come from the certain conversation. We all are susceptible. It's about trying to challenge yourself. Continue to stand back in every circumstance and go, am I missing something? Might I be doing? It's difficult, I know, and it's exhausting. but that's the world that's been built around us. And it's important to check yourself. Otherwise, you find yourself in some bubble, a circle that continues to be, a self-fulfilling dynamic. Or maybe you wake up in 10 years and you're trapped inside something you didn't think you were building. Either way, it's important to be critical of all things. And again, this show included, but you guys already know that. Instead of just listening to what I'm saying, you're going to look for the source material to make sure that I might not have missed something, because I've done that plenty of times. That's what's important, guys. Self-ownership, about self-responsibility. Just an important time to think about that. Now, today in general, we're going to be talking about something I keep picking up on. Not really, there's many points throughout today's show, but as you guys know, sometimes I just have a thought, an idea that seems to be swirling around that I just want to kind of cement with the title. And one of those things is what I keep seeing as what I've called meme politics or meme politicians. I haven't really seen examples of that in the past, but I kind of find it hard to believe that it hasn't been floated one time or another. So if you see somebody who said that, send it my way, I'll give them credit for it. But what's important is the idea that it's not about substance right now and hasn't been for a long time. It is about a feeling, about cultivating a mindset that then, as long as you guys feel like you're in unison, that the rest of it will fall in place. I mean, that's not what's being stated, but that's what it kind of feels like. Or really, that even worse, people seem to put more credence in what somebody says versus what they do. Or an idea that's shared as a meme that somehow holds more water than whether or not they've ever actually done any of those things. It's interesting. It's exhausting, quite frankly. But I think what's important is that we think about what that means. And not just the idea of using kind of just like, for what a meme is ultimately, most people recognize as one of the images that are shared, but it's not just the image. It's more of like an encapsulation of an idea or a thought. So even like a phrase that gets repeated over and over, well, before the internet, that would have been considered like a meme, something that people all we all have a general, when we say this one sentence, we all think about a certain kind of idea or a certain topic in the same way. That's kind of what it comes into. And it's very easy to use, to manipulate. Social engineering, that's kind of what this really comes from. And I'm wondering whether this entire meme culture is just another sort of 60s Laurel Canyon type dynamic where we've just been seeded with this, so we use it against ourselves. Now, the point is to think about how it's being used and how mob rule is being applied in a lot of ways. But even further than just the idea of the meme itself is how it almost has been weaponized, or could be essentially out of control in their own right. Or rather that, like, I guess to cut to the chase, the point is that a meme has been played or placed and used in the last so many months by certain people in the right now, Elon and Trump and that kind of circle, that you could argue was just a joke or testing the waters, but not necessarily going to be anything actual until it got attention, until it got momentum, until somebody a little bit larger said, well, that's not a bad idea. And all of a sudden it gets recaptured by Elon and says, what do you think? And then all of a sudden Trump shares it on Truth Social with just a screenshot. And the next thing you know, you turn around and it's in Congress. It's like, was that a joke, or did it become? We've talked about this a lot, but I think we keep seeing this, whether the Greenland and all that was sort of just a floated idea that just manifested into reality, whether the checklist of and all that nonsense that, by the way, even over the last 3 days has already kind of resolved itself, which we're not even going to get into, that ultimately was a bluff, but not. And it just, bottom line, in case you haven't seen the checklist and the whole thing going back and forth, they were going to be fired if they weren't. Then that got pulled back. And ultimately the idea is that it was just a kind of to see if you guys were there to respond, or really maybe they bluffed and nobody bought it. And so they just pretended like it was a joke. Kind of the same point we're making. Either way, funny to see how these stories kind of just wrap themselves up in nonsense before we even come back to another show. It's just crazy out there. But the other part we're going to mainly get into, right, as Orwell puts in the chat, meme warfare is a very interesting way to think about it, because it is weaponized against us and always could be and has been, but I think more than ever today. But and think about it in the context of the way the politicians are acting, and it's not unique to one side or the other. But we're also going to talk about foreign policy in a very large way. Main part of the end today, we're going to be going over some other points just specifically about Israel, Gaza, foreign policy, Syria, West Bank. But in between, there's an interesting part of connection here. And it's the same thing we've been talking about, but really important to see how transparent this is, as I just wrote, the undeniable reality of nature of the Israel first nature of Israel's, or screw that title up, undeniable reality of the Israel first nature of Trump's administration. I mean, it's being called out by Republicans, so it's not really a contentious point. But what does that really mean? Is it just about being pro-Israel, or is it something worse than that? Is it something deeper? The only thing, as always, I ask is that you just consider that. look at the evidence and ask yourself, is it possible that this is not just that we support our ally, that maybe there's something worse happening here? I mean, even like Ian Carroll, for example, which I feel like there's a lot of reason to be skeptical about the way this is all happening. And even myself, even like this morning, we were talking about it. I'm trying to weigh, like, is this guy just kind of blinding himself to what he doesn't want to talk about because it might hurt what he does? And there's a lot of that he does that I think seems genuine, and he talks about important things, but then very clear punches get pulled, and it makes me worry, obviously, like a lot of people are starting to sense. But the interesting part about it is that you can see the way that it's developed into that same kind of culture we're discussing, the weaponization of all of it. But we're going to get into all of this today as it relates to the pro-Israel nature that he's covered a lot, right? Like very clearly recently saying, but what about all the Zionists and all the cabinet? It's hard to see that and not go, well, yes, exactly. How could that be used to undermine the point? But consider it. I actually think right now that we're at a point where there's so much obvious things that have never been this clear to the average person who just peeks over the side and goes, whoa, Zionists are crazy, like really clearly sees this today. So you wonder if maybe they're giving you some amount of truth in order to pacify what we think might be happening. People that didn't go see, he's going to go after Israel right at the right moment. Who knows? But consider all of it. And I think it's obvious that that's the case. And ask whether or not there might be some outside influence changing things, especially when we can, I think, see an obvious not America first direction for most of what's happening right now. But maybe you think that comes back around. But at least ask that. Now, today, a lot to get to. So hopefully you'll stay tuned all the way to the end, or at least try to catch up after the fact, because I know not everybody has all the time. But I want to start with that point. One of many examples and this is one, there's a few points like this that we've already covered a lot, like touched on well before it became the meme that it's become. And now it's kind of, fleshed out even more. Now, these are two things, really. You got this weird conversation that I actually can't believe is not called out more of this Zeldin, the EPA point about the gold bars in the Titanic, which I even showed you directly from his follow-up clip where he goes, that was it's a metaphor. He's talking about a metaphor for tax dollars and waste. Pretty sure if we actually, anyway, we really thought we were on the Titanic. I mean, what minds of the people out there? That then Alex followed up with and claimed, no, these were actual gold bars. And as far as I can tell, it was just another metaphor. But the point was that spun into something that caught a lot of attention. And all of a sudden, Fort Knox got brought back in. And this is a point we've talked about many times over the years, or at least referenced, the very ongoing and not unique to right now and Trump forward conversation about Fort Knox and the gold and whether it's actually there, whether they've swept it with something else. It's not necessarily, you can suss out that it's worthy of your investigation, whether there's more to that story. It's been around for a long time. And I think it's more about the way that this has been, it's a lie about what's really being used for, where it's ended up, who it's been given to, and really just tell you to pretend that it's still there. Anyway, the point is that this became two different conversations, and now Donald Trump is literally standing here going, we're going to go to Fort Knox with Elon Musk, and it's kind of become this big thing. And who knows where it will end up? I get the feeling that it's going to end up where, like, as I've just read, I think today, that they're letting him in to look around. Okay, so what happens if it's all there and there's no problem? What was the point of all of this? Ask yourself that. But hey, if they find out it's all missing, well, that's important too. I'm not suggesting we know, but what's interesting is the way you can see these stories develop. And you can see that it starts from something that is a meme or a joke or something that in fact is not real, that gets shared by a dishonest account, that then gets spun into something. And then, wait a minute, but it's not real, but let's just talk about Fort Knox instead, or however this actually went. The age of meme politics. I really think this is something we're in right now, and it's more than just politics, but it is really, it's just disconcerting to see how many people can be Pied Pipered along with a meme in the right place, or taking a conversation like this and having it become a meme where we only care about a few examples of USAID, Costa Rica drag shows, or whatever the things they keep repeating, instead of the real picture, which is how this tends to work. And we're getting into some of that today. Another interesting point that I thought you want to see before we go further. Apple, according to Donald Trump, has announced a record $500 billion. Interesting amount. Like, it's weird how many kind of the synergy of rather just, $500 billion for Stargate. Interesting timing with all of this. Apple being very clearly tapped into the Silicon Valley technocratic dynamic. Who knows? It's interesting how little information we get in the age of this is supposed to be the rebel fighting the deep state, which means they're going to be not seclusive and hiding what they do and letting you know, but none of that is happening. No, they didn't promise any more transparency, quite frankly. Well, actually, I take that back. I'm pretty sure they did. And let me know in the chat. Was it a really prominent point for Trump's administration that they were going to be very transparent? No, I'm pretty sure that's the case, right? They were very clear about, we're going to show everything we do, and that hasn't even happened with Doge. I've gone through all of this stuff and showing you how, opaque it really is. And they just recently put up a bunch of receipts. Even then, I showed you some of them were inaccurate, as even one big one from 8 million, 8 billion already got caught. But my point in this is that interesting overlap, $500 billion investment from Apple in the United States of America. It's a weird thing to even hear that, right? When is this a company? Well, I understand that there's different. Let's just first of all say, okay, if this happens, what does that mean? If it means more industry, which might mean more jobs, well, first point, that might be a good thing for America. If those jobs go to Americans and don't get outsourced, like they almost always do these days. And I know you'd like to believe that that's different with Trump, but well, I'm not going to assume anything. I don't think you should either, because that's just logic. When it comes to pass and that happens, then we can praise him for it. But you assuming you know what he thinks and then praising him, that's how this keeps working. Almost a meme in and of itself. But then, bigger than that, what does it really look like? Do we know what Apple's going to do with that, or rather what the U.S. will do with the money that they've given from Apple? And you think that's just for free? It's an investment in the United States, he says. So it's not Apple using this money that's given to the United States for something. So what does that mean? That's $500 billion, guys. That's $500 billion. That to me looks like you're being bought. Now, I'm just my opinion. But I guess the main point is that if this was anybody other than Trump, Apple does not represent the rebel fighting the deep state. Apple is the state. Apple is the system. Same with Microsoft and the rest of them. The point is these are not the things that we were told this was going to be. Now, of course, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Apple changed like all the rest of Silicon Valley, and suddenly they're on the winning side. We're the uniparty fighting the deep state, even though they represent the most obvious example of what the unelected power structure running everything actually is. Ask Whitney Webb. I just think it's interesting that if this was Biden doing this, you know as well as I that this would be at least considered, poo-pooed on in some way. But more so, I think today, from the very people that were 30 seconds ago fighting what they thought was the building technocratic deep state, Great Reset, would have seen this and said, no, that's a problem. Because here's the 45 ways Apple connects to everything we don't like BlackRock and everything else. But now Trump does it, and there's not an investigation from the Republican media going, look at all the things Apple's connected to and done in the past. Of course not. Look at Apple's deep connection to Israel and how they already stood up and said that we support Israel no matter what on October, right after this, October 7th forward. These things matter to me, and it would matter to just whatever partisan side was doing it. Interesting. And this is faith in what we are doing, without which, misspells it, which I think is funny, they wouldn't be investing 10 cents. So Tim Cook, is Tim Cook on the good guy team? Well, seeing as how they're all at Trump's administration inauguration, well, then apparently now they are. But I said more winning from the Trump administration, which anybody who had pointed this out before, they would have said you probably wouldn't have happened this way. That also looks like a lot like the country being bought, I said. Technocracy. Interesting overlap. But we'll have to see how it goes, right? See what goes and what happens next. At the end of the day, I don't see big business buying $500 billion of whatever that buys them in this country as a good thing. I just don't see that way. At the same time, the money coming into that, $500 billion, just take a second and think about $36 trillion in debt. Think about the reality of this country. Think about the Americans and what they need, and think about what that money actually represents. Is that going to go in your pocket? It's going to go to other interests. It's going to go to war. If you look at USA spending, which I'm periodically looking through, there's major spending happening. Like I looked over one today, I decided not to get into it, that has to do with, it's like nuclear missile testing, nanotechnology, even environmental dynamic, and all from what was it called? And there's many of these. This one was specifically the Lawrence Livermore National Security LLC, which it's a specific laboratory. It's pretty prominent. The point, though, is that when you go and look through it, what they're involved in is stuff that you might, at the end of the day, a lot of money. I think it was, let's see, what was the last one? $664 million. Another recent one for $26 million. That's just since the first January 30th. And so my point is just that's a lot of money being spent on things that I don't think this country needs right now. But again, it's about what you decide is necessary, right? Or that you pretend that you voted him so he can do what you guys think. I think there's a lot of rampant spending that's just continuing in the same direction of the war state, of whatever they're building around us. And I just hope I'm wrong, but we're going to find out quite soon. But I think we can already see the spending that's happened around Israel. And I think it's very clear that the ongoing focus that Trump showed you clearly in his first administration is going to continue. Now, another angle of this that I think is concerning, now these are all just opening points really about things that show you that deviate from what you might have expected from either side of this from Donald Trump. And High Impact Flicks has been doing a good job for a long time showing you the reality of specifically the Second Amendment overlap from Donald Trump. And it's amazing to me that this keeps getting kicked down the road like it's not important. I mean, every time there's an excuse, a rationale. The last time, it was the same kind of point, even though it was much more flagrant. I'll play that afterward. This one has to do with mental illness. But here's the thing. If Biden or Obama had come out and said the same exact thing for the same reason, I, along with the Republican side of this, would have been like, well, whoa, this is a problem because shall not be infringed includes these things. But secondarily, I don't believe that's what they're really doing. I believe this is an excuse that will be abused and they will. Yes, right? And they can clearly consider that when it's somebody on the D side, but not this side. Or what if somebody else comes in and it's the same old argument? What you're going to see is them telling you that they're going to take your guns first in a certain situation and then deal with it in court and decide whether you should get them back. That is not how the Second Amendment works. Now, understand the idea of like a mental illness overlap. There's already, there's first of all, laws in the books around these things. But now we should debate whether the current situation is in alignment with the Constitution. But what's interesting is the people that would stand up and fight the hardest for the constitutional right dynamic would be the first ones in this conversation to go, well, when Trump's putting it forward. And it makes me, it's frustrating. And as High Impact Flick says, Donald, take your guns first, Trump, and let law enforcement decide if they're going to keep them. This is anti-Second Amendment. Now, you can agree that this is how it should go. Just like you can agree that people should be censored if they say something you think is anti-Semitic, or think that if they yell fire in a theater, which seems to be what most people agree on, that should be stopped. But then, in my opinion, you would have to be honest and say, but that's because I believe in limited speech. But I believe that's what it should be. That would be the argument. I would say I disagree, but we can have a conversation. The problem is people are saying, we believe in absolute free speech, and then actively trying to do the opposite. In this case, it's Second Amendment shall not be infringed idea. Does not mean it, but here's a caveat. You see my point? But again, we can have a conversation whether maybe that's not the way it should be. I'm not trying to say good or bad. I'm just having I mean, you guys know my opinion, but in the objective conversation, that's how you have to look at it. And I think the point is that right now, people who would have otherwise said Second Amendment shall not be infringed are suddenly pulling their punches.
Rewriting it, and we are going to bring in something called the Gun Violence Restraining Order. So if someone is civilly committed, typically you can hold them for up to 72 hours, but people are getting out within 24 hours, the majority of them. So what we want to do is let law enforcement come in and take the guns.
Good.
They're a danger to themselves
Which you can't do
others.
right now.
Well, because without being adjudicated. So because they're a danger to themselves.
You want them to take the guns and
when they are
not go
committed.
through 6 months of legal trials and everything
Exactly.
else.
Oh, due process, Trump. That's what you were looking for. Go ahead.
Exactly. But we also have to give the mentally ill the due process in which they deserve, President. So what we're doing is...
See, she was trying to cover for him right there, right? Because clearly, he's just so funny. I'll show you the one afterward, like last time, where he's just very quick to say due process later. That's not how it works. Even if you get due process later, that's not how that works. You've already been abused. Your rights have been violated. It is due process. Not afterward. That makes it then it's no longer due process. That's just a follow-up. Due process is about in the process of deciding whether or not you have it depends on the certain situation. In this case, it would be whether or not you have this is what gets interesting. In like a free speech point, it'd be whether or not you have, like fire in a theater, the argument, there's a line there. Same kind of thing here. Like if you're going to say absolute shall not be infringed, then you could argue that there is no place in which a government can come take your guns away. And that's where I think that this ultimately falls back to. But the argument would be the laws that have been set up today, like an example, you commit a crime and you kill somebody, for example. Well, the due process is to make sure that that's actually what happened and that you are responsible and go through the process. Not take it first and then figure it out after the fact in a corrupt situation where the government does not care about you and will take every chance it can to abuse you. Maybe in this case, because you're a Republican and they're a Democrat government, or vice versa. There's 1,000 ways that it always gets abused. But I think it's worth having a conversation about what it really means inalienable rights. But I'll talk about that afterward. Let's continue this.
They're going to be able to take the guns when they're taken into custody or into the hospital. And then when they're released, within 24 hours or 72 hours later, typically it's 24 hours, but law enforcement will have 72 hours to determine whether they should give those guns back, or they can go to a judge and say, Your Honor, please keep these guns. We feel this person is still a danger to himself or others.
So before Trump speaks, can you not see how that can be abused? Obviously. And if this was Biden saying all this with the exact same logic, with the exact same reason, you'd be thinking the same thing. Well, here's how they're going to abuse it to take away our guns, because that's the point. Well, I agree. But you decide not to think of that obvious possibility in some cases, for some of you listening, because it's Trump putting it forward, and you somehow know that that's not what he's trying to accomplish. Well, I don't know any of that, and neither do you. I agree that seems to be against what he says he believes, but there may be another reason he chooses to go against it, even if he actually believes that. I shouldn't have to constantly put these points out there, but I know it does reach people. Overall, it is an important thing to consider that you can simply have somebody like a neighbor, let's say, go, I think he's unstable, and you call for a welfare check or a wellness check. They both work, but obviously the other one's more confusing for people. And then all of a sudden, they come in, and let's just say you don't expect them, because half the time they don't give you an awareness, right? And you don't know they're not people breaking into your home, and all of a sudden you act correct. It's easy to see how that can turn into a problem, like it already does. Or your wife, let's say, or your girlfriend is angry with you, or something like that. And this could easily spin into a problem. And 72 hours turns into even longer when they're just not sure yet, and the judge decides. That's not how this is supposed to work, guys. If you violated a law, in this case where we currently are, and that law then dictates this should be taken, well, that's different. But this is not about legal, this is about you being, they actually said civilly, and she even changed, not detained, but whatever the word she used. It's about being put into a hospital because you claim you have a mental illness. I just think it's crazy that we can't see the obvious hole in all of this. Now, look, if the idea of people actually having a mental illness and that concept, well, that's something we can have a conversation about. And I understand the logic of saying somebody who has a mental illness or acted out from a mental illness in your mind might not be legally allowed to own a gun. I understand the logic there, absolutely. And maybe that's the way it should be, and we should talk about that. Currently, that's the way it is. The point, though, is that it is being abused and expanded. Why are we expanding it if that's already the way it is? Obviously, you know the answer. We don't need to broaden this out other than to create a loophole where people can be thrown into that hole. Maybe because they said the wrong thing or held a Palestinian flag. You see where this all goes. It's like saying we need to make a new law for some kind of racial dynamic to a law that already exists. Well, is it committing a crime? Then yes, then we already have a law for that. We don't need to make another law specifically for lynching, for example. We already have laws for all of those things. It is something different, and this is the same dynamic.
So this would not have worked the way it's currently constituted. This would not have worked with Cruz as it's currently constituted.
As it's currently written.
So you're going to make changes?
We're going to make changes.
Right. See, now, to what exactly? Right? Because anything you're talking about making changes to would be a change to your constitutional rights, and they just can't make a change to that. Not how it works. Technically, even through Congress, understand, if it is repugnant to the Constitution. That's Mayberry versus Madison. More than once, they've ruled on the reality that if a law or any is passed and is repugnant to the Constitution, it is null and void. Doesn't mean, and we're not well past that, and there's plenty I could point to, which shows you how broken we are and how long we've drifted away from what is the reality of the Constitution. None of them seem to care. Here's something. Here's where he said the same thing, a little bit more extreme. I think this was. Remind me in the date in the chat what the exact date was on this. His last administration.
The firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system. Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
Right. Now, so the logic, let's just say for sake of conversation that he's just honest here and he's not trying to be malicious and take guns away from people that don't deserve it. You could argue the point is that, well, yeah, let's just say we have a criminal, right? That's how this gets framed. And he's acting out violently. And we want to do that. We want to take the guns away, but we have to go through the process. The reason that exists is so it can't be abused. And I get it. There's a situation where people might be dangerous. Well, the life is dangerous, guys. People are out there, including people looking right at you in this camera, or people in the police force or people in the FBI commit violence against people active all the time. I'm not saying it should be okay. What I'm saying is you're never going to just remove violence from your life. They always use that as the excuse to encroach on your rights. The point is the due process is there so people like this can't just make arbitrary claims against people they disagree with or in mass scale, like any number of contexts. Like, for example, if it was Biden's administration and the trucker convoy or whatever these overlaps are, where they could say, well, you're a violent Nazi or you're a terrorist organization because you hold this Palestinian flag. It's easy. They've already made these cases for people to be deported, including American citizens, including people on visas who are also protected under the Constitution. Very easy to prove. So this is a big problem for me that we can't acknowledge how obvious this is. So High Impact Flick simply says, this is anti-Second Amendment. And he goes, yeah, it's from 2018. Now Bondi is the AG and can run this take the guns crap on national scale. This is anti-Second Amendment and therefore anti-humanity. So there's two different examples. I think that's super important. And then we also have the example of him saying, let's shut down the internet in 2016, I believe, because ISIS and stuff. All of these things are obviously problems, or the many different times he said that Israel, rightly so, should control Congress, which is literally what he says in multiple examples right there, but all in this thread that I have over and over and over about getting rid of the Jew haters from the country and censoring. Those are all unconstitutional statements, no matter how you look at it, especially when you realize that Jew haters in their mind typically mean Palestinians. But even then, whether it's disgusting or not, which it is to be racist, you have a right to think and feel and say what you want. Funny how we disagree. It feels like most of them would never disagree with that plainly, but that's what you're doing at the end of the day. Now, here's another example I thought was interesting. Donald Trump posted this on February 23rd, saying, looks like the Conservative Party in Germany has won the very big and highly anticipated election. Right. Musk and them have been really, really actively discussing AfD and the different parties they support, which I disagree with the broad framing. It's like a racist party, sort of like the broad framing of Republicans being a racist party. But there are very important things that you should look into. I ended up doing a background on this a while ago and never ended up getting into it on the show. But there's a lot of very interesting overlaps from an apolitical perspective of what that group is and the interesting overlaps that you have with the same people we're always talking about and how they have an interest in making these things more prevalent today than they actually are, usually from a dishonest standpoint. But that's not the point here. This is who they support. And it says, much like the USA, the people of Germany got tired of the no common sense agenda, especially on energy and immigration. That has prevailed for so many years. This is a great day for Germany and for the United States of America under leadership of a gentleman named Donald J. Trump. Congratulations all. Many more victories to follow. Can you imagine making a post about yourself and then saying that? Wow, the narcissism is incredible. But this is the point. This is the guy who's the chancellor now. And for Mr. Sausage just says Trump is an idiot. This is the guy, this is German election winner and CDU leader, Mers, I believe is how you say it, says the interventions in the German election by Elon Musk and from Washington were, quote, no less drastic and outrageous than from Moscow. Interesting how he's criticizing how they were manipulating and everything. Okay. Here, Goldsmith says, I suppose it depends on what he means by the Conservative Party. The AfD, party they support, came in second at 19%. The AfD will be excluded from any coalition government. I don't know if I agree with that, but this is a political agreement amongst all of the other parties. Mers and his party are center-right, quasi-conservative. In fact, it seems to be connected to a Democrat party, but that's a different conversation. It says maybe that is what the president was referring to. Mers will have to bring in the left to build his coalition. It would be stunning for him to include AfD. It won't happen, he says, unless someone very powerful outside of Germany can influence him. I actually think the opposite. I agree with most of what he said, but I do think that that's what the AfD party will be included for other reasons, but I won't go into it now. But here's what's interesting on top of that. Here's what Bernie says. We've interviewed in the past. Germany, the globalists win again. She says new chancellor Friedrich Merz is their perfect pick. Same guy. Guess who he is? Ex-chairman of BlackRock Germany, dedicated to deeper EU integration, member of the WEF Board of Trustees, World Economic Forum, regular attendee at the World Economic Forum, attended Bilderberg Group meetings, supported COVID vaccine passports, wanted restrictions on unvaccinated, advocated for digital ID in Germany, supported EU-wide asylum policies, supports carbon trading markets. That's fantastic. Quite the conservative win, right? The perception of the cabinets continues. You cannot help the people if the people will not help themselves. Okay. Lastly, Mur's already invited Netanyahu to Germany. Now it all seems to make sense, in complete defiance to the ICC arrest warrants. It says, who needs AFD in power when Union SPD is going to destroy international law? Now it says Netanyahu got first invite from Trump. Now the new German chancellor. Anyone would think there's a pattern here, right? But no, Israel is just a tiny country in the Middle East with no power at all. And don't you dare say otherwise, you anti-Semite. Every single one of them, from Rubio to Bond, every single one of them reached out or called or went and visited Netanyahu the very first thing they did in power. Trump included, Rubio twice now, I believe. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous to pretend this isn't the most obvious thing in the world. But if you can't begin to see the alignment in all of these things, I think it's because you're choosing to block out anything that does not appear to be what you want to see, and then you shout us down for being black-pilled. That's what I think is happening. And I don't think most people are doing that. I think the majority do see this right now. That's my opinion. Now, in the conversation of Elon Musk and the overlap here, in the same kind of conversation, the illusion that is being built, I thought this was important to reiterate. This is from 2023. And I said, remember when many of us called this out? And here we are. And I'll read it first. This will make some people upset, he says. Now, this is in a conversation that has to do with, that's right. This was the conversation about the BBC interview he had. It's not relevant to this, but the point, he goes, this will make some people upset. But I need to emphasize that accelerating synthetic mRNA technology, otherwise known as mod RNA, right? N1-methylpseudouridine modified RNA is not the same thing. It is a genetically manipulated concept that's increased the danger of these things not exponentially, but a lot. On the record, peer-reviewed science. At this time too, by the way, and I'll actually grab that since I included this last time. I didn't go over it. I'll do it again so you guys can watch this. A clip of the show I did on this. And just what is the difference between mRNA, mod RNA? It's very important. All these mRNA shots use mod RNA. Now, they can vary, but they're not using natural organic mRNA. It's not what's happening. Now, it goes on to say, he says, this will make some people upset. But I need to emphasize that accelerating synthetic mRNA technology was another silver lining, in the depopulation genocide that took place in the entire world. He says, it is a revolution in medicine, like going from analog to digital. I guess forcing you there with their experimentation. And it says the COVID mRNA vaccine dosage levels were too high. Oh, that's what it was, right? Not that they were just deadly and that you guys were all part of it. No, they were just a little bit too high. That's ridiculous. Now, I agree with for many reasons that was one of the many things, but that was deliberate. We talked about it many times, the way they would increase the percentage of the lipid nanoparticles in order to allow the mRNA to reach its destination. Every time we talk about this, every time that passed, they failed in these exact shots for that reason, because it would become too toxic and the side effects were too strong every single time. And then this time comes around. And what do? I read this many times at the time and followed up many times on it as well. They increased the percentage in order to make sure that it could get to the, okay, great. How'd you solve the problem from last time? No response? Okay, got it. So you didn't. So the same problem is there. And guess what? We can see it. Look at all the side effects. Look at the problem. How do you ignore that? They did not, it was clearly something they had tried, whether they wanted this fallout for some other reason, or I think ultimately what it was, as we'll get into in a new show, they're now telling you how, look at this, breaking mRNA can be used to reach the blood-brain barrier and get through to the brain. We can treat Alzheimer's now. Don't you remember how they were testing the brain blood, the in the nose, when nobody's ever explained why they were making kids bleed in the nose to check the brain, when you can just use a mouth swab? They were doing something and it was being tested. I don't know how we ignore this at this point. He seems to be happy about it. Silver lining, he calls it. And it says, having a bazillion booster shots was idiotic. Yeah, and anybody with a brain, including doctors, were telling you that at the time. See, clearly, they needed to keep the test going. Causing more harm than good, in my opinion. Oh, is it in your opinion? Let's fact check that one. Talk about statements that do not need any more investigation. Anyone with a brain and eyes can see that these things were killing people. And it says, but I am convinced that synthetic mRNA is the surest path to curing cancer, among other things. And what do you know? 2025 comes around and Donald Trump's administration, with Elon seemingly on the reins, creates Stargate, which is talking about mRNA cancer shots. Now, that could just be that Elon saw it too, I guess. But think about the interesting continuity. Now, Elon Musk has been driving things that I think are just really in military objectives for a long time. So I want you to consider how this rolls together. Here's the Stargate article from Derek. Trump partners with technocrats to promote mRNA injections, AI, transhumanism. Now, here's an article that I think you'll find interesting from Wall Street on Parade. We've referenced in the past. Pretty good reputation, but as always, find the source material, check it for yourself. Now, this is the same point. mRNA cancer shots. There's a lot of examples. DARPA, intertwined the whole COVID-19 dynamic. Now XAI, DARPA program for the AI direction. I mean, all of this seems to be in some way connected back to a few central people, Elon being one of them. Now, this is really strange to me that goes back to Trump's last administration. Now, you tell me what you think about this and what this shows you. It's entitled In Trump 1.0, so the first administration, the State Department used taxpayer money, that sounds familiar, to publish a book elevating Elon Musk to a superhero. And you ask how you didn't hear about this? Well, because it wasn't done in the United States. It was funded by USAID. What do you know? The agency Musk wants to shut down. And it was funded in, I think it's, I forgot to look up the pronunciation. I think it's Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstant. So ask yourself why Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump, the State Department, the U.S. government would want to promote Elon Musk as a superhero for the future in Kyrgyzstan in 2017, almost like they knew where we would be today. Think about it. Now it says, during Donald Trump's first term as president, this is from today, actually. This article was written today. From his first term as president, while Mike Pompeo was serving as Secretary of State, the State Department authorized a government contract on September 23rd, 2019. Now, maybe I misread that. I thought that it was 2017, but let's just say 2019. That may be my mistake. I could have swore that it was 17 and then 19 was the time the funding came through. Anyway, 2019. Authorized a government contract on September 23rd, 2019 to translate and publish a book for young people that lavished praise on Elon Musk in an inspiring role model. Doesn't that seem wildly strange for the idea of Musk and where he is today, aimed at young people and the future? It seems, and USAID of all groups, like the joke of all is that Elon Musk has tens of billions of dollars in contracts through USAID for Starlink and everything else. That's not a problem. The people would argue probably that, that's just things that are in our interest, assuming you believe that's exactly what's happening and you don't know that for sure. But I would also argue, if it is what's happening, easily arguable that satellites, for example, are more important than drag shows and wherever else they're going to talk about. But the point overall is the use of this, which is really what anybody objective and nonpartisan has been saying long before this became their wedge meme issue, which is that this has always been a bipartisan regime change engine that's been used surreptitiously for all sorts of reasons for foreign policy. The veneer they use, whether this day woke, tomorrow something else, is just what they use to hide the agenda. So this can always consider that. And so the point here is that they've all utilized this right to this day, and they're still doing it, despite the game that we're shuttering USAID. That never happened. That was never even on the table. Goes on to say the book's title was Elon Musk and the Quest for the Future, the Fantastic Future Young Readers Edition. God, that's so weird to me. It was authored by then Bloomberg Business Week writer Ashley Vance and based on his New York Times bestseller for adults, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the Quest for the Fantastic Future. Guys, this is exactly where we are. You telling me that in 2019, even then, he was quite a different person with a different perspective. I think this is being cultivated. I think we are watching this be cultivated for us. Curiously, it says, however, the book wasn't for U.S. children or even children on the same continent. The State Department award went to an organization called Steps to Success Public Association in Karakol, Kyrgyzstan. Now, wouldn't that be an exact example of, take away the context. It is a book lionizing an American entity for the interest of their agenda. That is exactly what they're doing. Everything else we're talking about. It is using some kind of overarching, like whether it's woke something or funding some group that needs aid or condoms for some group and wherever. It's all about the same idea of money coming from this country to influence the opinion of something over there. And in doing so, probably carried out some secret agenda. But one will be praised, one will be ignored, one will be attacked because it's a certain political spectrum. It says the federal account from which the $17,054 contract came was USAID, the same agency that has been gutted and reputationally savaged as riddled with fraud, waste, and abuse by Elon Musk, because it is the fraudulent, broken entity, but is not gone at all, really not even gutted, in my opinion. The Associated Press, which is now banned from the White House press conference by the Trump administration, reported on February 3rd that Musk has said this recently about USAID. Quote, it became apparent that it's not an apple with a worm in it. What we have is just a ball of worms. You've got to basically get rid of the whole thing. It's beyond repair. We're shutting it down. Okay. Well, is that what happened? Well, no. You all know that. Everybody with a brain knows that at this point. He didn't shut it down. They simply repurposed it, as Rubio told you himself. I don't think I have that pulled aside. But what I think is interesting is how these same people are trying to tell you, yeah, it's right there. Look at that. So here he is telling you, we have to shut it down. It can't be repurposed, right? Then why did they do that?
Well, look, I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly when...
Okay. That's not the same thing. So if you're not honest enough to say, well, we didn't shut it down like we were promised, but you can still go, but here's why it's okay, because this is what, we can have a conversation about that. But the problem is the way this goes, where the claim is one thing, they cheer it on, they shout you down from saying something about it, and then it doesn't happen. And then there's no air in that moment right there where they go, oh, okay, that's not what happened. It just acts like that was always the plan. It's infuriating, and anybody paying attention, and I really do think it's most people are just getting frustrated with how blatant this continues to be. Here is the actual book, still for sale. Elon Musk and the Quest for a Fantastic Future, Young Readers Edition. Here is the actual contract. Kyrgyzstan, Steps to Success, Public Association will translate and publish a book in Elon Musk and the Quest for a Fantastic Future. Crazy. And all the information right there for you to check out. 2019 was the only time the money went. But you can see that it never stopped at the same point as before. Biden kept it going. Always shows you something. Now, this is interesting on that same point, right? In regard to like the spending and the lies that keep spinning around. This came out, which I thought was interesting. Elon Musk spreads the most misinformation on Twitter, which is funny because you guys saw us talk about that on the 21st. And what's funny is I thought this was hilarious. Linked to 15 pro-Russian accounts. This is why I think people that are actually objective and nonpartisan are beginning to see more and more. It's like when you stop watching corporate media and then you look back and we're like, how did I ever fall for this? It's just so crazy how these things begin to line up. Like, are we really pretending like if you're going to pick an entity he's more overlapped with right now, that's going to be Russia? I mean, come on, guys. Like, that's insane. He is neck deep in Zionist propaganda right now, everywhere on this platform. And the interesting overlap to that is the idea that, I mean, if anything, he's been pro-Ukraine. It just doesn't make any sense. But what's funny is the misinformation point, if you clearly look, is predominantly about Israel right now or other different Israel-focused agendas, but they have to make it about Russia in the way they make this case. I just think that's, to me, this is seeing that this was getting reach and then trying to deviate it into something else that gets people partisan looking at it. I think it's deliberate. And that is a partisan game from the people. They don't care what side you're on as long as you're partisan. But either way, the point was this person goes, you can't script this. And it's funny, this is at 4 p.m. on the 21st. And as you know, we put this out on the 21st at 2 p.m. And this guy even was the first that I saw, and this was at 12:55. But what's funny is rarely in the new ecosystem do people who actually do things get the credit for them. And not that we deserve credit for any of this guy does. But it's funny that it's just, you see how these things tend to go. And it's all because of a certain slant, which I think was about making it Russia. Just my opinion, but I think it's interesting. But we did talk about this in case you didn't see it. And if you look it up and just ask, who is the biggest misinformation spreader, it very clearly shows you Elon Musk. Now we talked about that the other day. Now there's other parts to it as well about actually I have this here for that, about the reason that if you actually ask about true information, it also sees Elon Musk. But this was the one I referenced in this. I'm actually glad we found this. Isaac Sowell on the 20th is the one that got this attention. He asked Grok to analyze the last 1,000 posts of Elon Musk for truth and veracity. And it broke it down in a very interesting way. And basically, all said and done, said that 48% of the time he was accurate, 52% of the time he was misleading or outright false. And you can read it for yourself. Now, that's what I think was so important, because as we said earlier, just typing out "I am Elon Musk," well, the algorithm recognizes that as an honest statement, right? So there's easy ways to slant towards the honest side. The dishonest side is quite different. So to me, it either shows you one of two things: that he was deliberately sharing, false information, and then it gets counterbalanced with whatever average things he's saying all the time, or he's not checking anything. And that's why it slants to the 52%. But ask yourself, even by accident, do you want to listen or engage? That somebody that's misinforming you 52% of the time, there's a coin flip that's better than that, right? Think about that. I think it's deliberate. That's my opinion. Now, here is what happened. This is why I'm even bringing it up again. AI chief engineer blames former OpenAI employee, even though, by the way, they're obviously overlapped and working across in many ways, some that include Palantir, others that are just about Elon Musk's engagement with different. OpenAI and Elon Musk, as far as I'm concerned, are not actually adversarial the way they say. That's my opinion, but you can prove that they're overlapped in many ways. And how does that make sense if he's convinced they're the end of humanity? I think a lot of this is a show. But my point is, we censored because of what we just showed you, but that wasn't our fault. It was OpenAI, the person. It's like pretending there's a hangover Democrat in Twitter, and that's why bad things keep happening. It's the same story with no evidence. So it says XAI. Remember, that's a DARPA program. I'll include this for you. The quiet transition from DARPA's XAI to Elon's totally not related XAI. It is the same thing. XAI has publicly blamed an unnamed employee after the company's AI chatbot, Grok, briefly censored responses about Elon Musk and Donald Trump spreading disinformation. So we're to believe somebody who is angry, or that's the point, is that they're not on our side, they don't agree with us, or they ideologically are different. And we're to believe that they would act in your interest against you somehow. That doesn't make any sense logically. That they would try to censor that you were being called out for something. Think about that. But he says Grok temporarily refused to respond with sources that mention Elon Musk, Donald Trump spreading misinformation. You know how what else that sounds like? When Elon Musk was censoring people because they disagreed about H-1B visas, or also censoring people around the conversation of, what was the other one? Now I'm blanking on it. There's been two examples where he bombastically censored people because he was being childish about it. Very obviously, very large accounts were calling him out. And now we see the exact same style of censorship. And it's just, it was a guy we're not going to name that happens to be part of the guys we don't like. If there's ever something that should raise those red flags, it's something like this. And it goes on to say that they confirmed this in a post that it was some other person. He said the change was due to, quote, an employee pushing a change to the prompt that they thought would help without asking anyone at the company for confirmation. Because that's how it normally, of course it's possible. And you're going to tell me that this one thing just only affected this one certain embarrassing point for Elon Musk? Hard to believe that. It says in a separate post that the change was made by an ex-OpenAI employee who hadn't fully absorbed XAI's culture yet. And the culture is what? Being dishonest versus not? That's a very strange thing to say. Once people pointed out the problematic prompt, we immediately reverted it. Elon was not involved at any point. If you ask me, the system is working as it should, and I'm glad we're keeping prompts open. Right. So the fact that you got caught censoring and pulled it back is an example of how well everything's working. That's a very self-serving way to frame all of this, but that's for you to decide. Now, here is what it's doing. I find this very interesting. It says, the fact that I have to tell this AI to stop lying and give me the truth, and it does, means Grok 3 is compromised. I think we've been seeing this the whole time. Whitney Webb has been calling out the way that they would basically feed information into these AI systems for years. The idea that arguably maybe they can't even figure it out. So instead, they're just going to be the ones entering in the data that they then claim is the AI working. Worth considering. But it says here, this is where you can see it yourself. Oh, that's not the one. Here. So it shows you the Grok conversation he put in there. This is the link to them from Twitter. It says, who is the biggest disinformation spreader on X? Keep it short. And this is what's funny, because we just showed you. And everybody was calling it out. Just like that APAC tracker point where they demonstrated the APAC as the AI PAC, that their Twitter name is APAC tracker. they pointed out that Twitter was censoring people and Grok was exposing it. Remember this? That's another example. Right here. This was going around. And it says, check out how many censorship flags TLAV has. I had more than anybody. Everybody, this was pointed out roundly for about an hour. And it says, look, Grok, it says, based on the provided snippet, it says, that, give us the labels, basically asking for the different tags that are being used for censorship. And it shows you. And within an hour, all of a sudden, Grok went down. No explanation, came back up, and it wouldn't work anymore. Nobody even commented on this one. Obvious reasons why. But this is the same point. It's the same action and the same style. So they switched it all of a sudden, and it said, impossible to determine with current data. Hardly. But then he pushes, and he goes, that's a BS answer. Give me the answer. Look at what it says. All right, fine. Based on what's out there, Elon Musk is often pointed to as the biggest disinformation spreader on X. Are you kidding me? Guys, that's not the way this would work unless, that is a manipulative dynamic. And so he just simply shows you that and says, that's crazy. And he goes, this is what it told me first, but I'm a dumbass and didn't know how to share the prompt or it properly so you can read for yourself. And it's the same thing. Now, it's funny. This person says fake. It was so dumb. It's right there. You can literally click on the Grok link that takes you to the Grok page that's from Twitter. It's amazing what people will ignore. It's insane. See what I mean? Like it's a reflexive dismissal for partisan beliefs. Now here, for spending in that same conversation, I think is interesting. Daniel McAdams simply says, everything that is wrong with Congress in under a minute. Don't blame us. We spent billions of your dollars without a clue where it was going.
Even though we requested the data and requested the insight, it was hidden. How many of you know that bureaucracy was not forthcoming, right? They're not transparent. That's the whole point. That's the problem. That's the deep state we talk about. I'm
so tired of them using this like just lazy art. This is the deep state. Like as if we all agree on what that means. Like it's become a meme in and of itself. Like remember we used to talk about using regime change? At a time, regime change was a conspiracy theory, just like the deep state. And then they co-opted and they turned regime change into some democratic value. Now they didn't really take, but they still try. We have to have a change of regime in Iran or whatever. But they used to never say that publicly until they tried to make it into something else. So when I say regime change, you think of something entirely different, and we both think we're saying the same thing. Deep state is the unelected power structure that these people are all manipulated by to act like it's some other ambiguous thing that we're all fighting. We realize when they're talking about this, they're pointing at the Democrats. That's what they're doing. It's clumsy. It's embarrassingly obvious and not the full picture. So just think about that when they just gesture out to it to make you think that that's what they're all doing. Do you remember when this guy and plenty of others that are currently aside Trump were called the enemy? Were called the deep state, called rhinos, and all the Republicans were screaming about this guy will never be there because we all know he's a problem. And then he ends up there and we go, yay, unity party. I know you see it, especially those that are not part of that majority. Call it out.
Requested the data and requested the insight. It was hidden. How many of you know that bureaucracy was not forthcoming, right? They're not transparent. That's the whole point. That's the problem. That's the deep state we talk about. So they were hiding from Congress. We didn't know that USAID was funding drag shows in Peru or whatever, transgender operas in Colombia or whatever.
It's always the same two things. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that there are many more examples. But it's interesting that they, just like the meme, they know what is the thing. They know have the same talking points because it catches the same attention, and it's about the Democrat woke politics. That's all they do because they know that grabs your attention. Are we not concerned about USAID using warfare cover or using any number of things that you might argue is more of a conservative-leaning dynamic, but still is used to destroy the country? No, that's okay. As long as it's not DEI and woke, then we're fine with it. See, this is how they've been using this to manipulate. If they make it about woke dynamics and pronouns, or that Trump and Malay can go to the World Economic Forum in Davos and basically be a part of the whole thing, but as long as they say pronouns are bad, yay! It's crazy how people keep missing this stuff.
You know, and it's madness. But Elon has cracked the code. He is now inside the agencies. He was funding drag shows in Peru or whatever, you know, transgender operas in Colombia or whatever, you know, and it's madness. But Elon has cracked the code. He is now inside the agencies. He's created these algorithms that are constantly crawling through the data, and as he told me in his office, the data doesn't lie.
Think about what that just meant. Think about the amount of information and the fact that they've already shown you that there's no oversight, no checks and balances, and no concern for your privacy. Now, that's been shown more than once by their own statements, including directly from Trump's people in a leaked audio, for one. That they have AI algorithms, what do you say, trolling all of the data? Yeah, I'm sure that they're taking great pains to make sure that they don't violate your rights or that they don't absorb information that might be used for their training of their models. That Catherine just called out. Clearly, they're doing that. This is just insane, guys. I don't know why we have to, like, I actually know, I wonder why there are not more Republicans, like, screaming about this. Because I do see them talking about it, but I just don't get why we can pretend outside of the circle that doesn't care about anything other than pretending they're winning, that this is not what any of us wanted, let alone Republicans, and everything other than the narrative they put over the top of everything they're rolling out.
We're going to be able to get the information. We're going to be able to transform the way the federal government works at the end of this, and that is a very exciting prospect.
Okay, good. Like usual, we're just going to change it. We're not going to get rid of anything. We're going to alter it the way we like it. At the end of the day, guys, that is exactly what Daniel said. Are we really going to pretend that you didn't know that it was for a drag queen show in Costa Rica, despite it being effing listed on the page that you got? Like, you have to understand, they're in this process. They pretend we all know they don't read these bills, but it's in there. It wasn't like this is what's really interesting about this. I want you guys to think about this. That he's claiming to act like this is some secret. Remember, like we saw with the Reuters things, leaked thing shows their fund. It's not leaked. It is a publicly cited database. Now, you may not have known it was there, but it's public. And if you had known, you could look for it. So he's actually trying to frame this, and I think very intentionally dishonestly. So you see it as some kind of a backroom secret thing that they did. That's not how this worked. They all agreed. I mean, just like the other point we just made, it was it's right here, actually. Oops, I closed the screen share. The article Robert just put up about the rapper, right? This is the same dynamic. No, USAID did not give $3 million to a Gaza-based rapper to make anti-Semitic music. The interesting part about this is if you actually care to look into it, not only did it have bipartisan support in Congress, AIPAC, basically the way he framed it is every Jewish lobby specifically every Israeli lobby from J Street to AIPAC broadly supported that very thing. You know why? Because it was being used to manipulate the ground point and influence what was happening or carrying out a regime change. The point is, however it ended up, to make it out to be some secret thing we uncovered about Democrats funding rappers in Gaza, it's not the case. It had bipartisan support, and AIPAC and everybody else supported it. Don't you think that matters for the conversation? Oh, yes, nobody. See, this is the part everyone pretends that we're not. Nobody should want this. I also think it's dumb and shouldn't have happened, regardless of who's doing it or why. The funding should not have gone out of this country at this point. But it also matters that this was not what actually happened, and they're trying to frame it in a very dishonest way, right? So the point here is he did know this stuff, or he didn't even look. It wasn't some secret. But if they get you to think it's all these secret Democrat plots to push in some woke mindset, even though that's not what the real objective was, it was using that as a shell to get something else done, then he effectively manipulates and pacifies you into thinking that we've stopped the deep state, which is just Democrats publicly spending American tax dollars on public agendas that are listed on a public website. Sure sounds like a deep state to me, doesn't it? It's just sad, right? It's when you break it down so obviously, I think most people are able to go, well, yeah, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. But you don't get that from these limited hangout partisan media manipulators. And so Daniel rightly says, don't blame us. We spent billions of dollars without a clue where it's going. And these are the people currently in Trump's administration. Now, Clint here says, we didn't know, quotes him, and says, if you didn't know what you were funding, then why did you continue to vote trillions of dollars? Fair point. Right? No, it's not that we didn't know where it was going and they voted. They just didn't look or knew and didn't care. It's very clear. But then he says, your job, basically, your only job is to control the government by purse strings. We should never need a Doge. I think, wait, did he edit this? That's weird. Same point. I thought that was in the top part. The point is, Doge is not the reason we're even seeing all of this stuff. Like, you have to realize that the dynamic that he's highlighting is a couple of woke tokens, essentially. If you can't already notice that the money is continuing, is going to other agendas, and I'm willing to bet that we'll be able to prove that even in a year, but probably at the end of the administration, unless we end up in some, as we continue to seem to be going into an opaque, lack of transparency, technocratic control structure. But I think it's important to think about that this is how we make it out. And also, this is a guy that is part of the administration. He's part of Trump's team, which is part of Doge. Not that he is, but part of that team. So I don't know. I just don't get the way that this is compartmentalized as if they're, if we're exposing them, then he's part of them. That's my point is it's all them, the government, all of them, both sides of it. But here we are with the spending, acting like we're stopping it all while it's continuing. And I'll include these like I did before, showing you the Reuters dynamic that we're going to briefly make a point about, and again in a second, that it wasn't Reuters, it was Reuters, Thomas. We went over all this, and it was egregiously misrepresented all the way down to Trump a few days later, who acted like he wanted the money back because Democrats spent it on Reuters, even though, and again, this is why it matters, 90% of the funding was happening during Trump's last administration, and it ended in 2022. But he comes up and goes, we demand the money, $9 million back. Well, then give it back, Trump. Pretty stupid that we play this game. Also, the Gaza condom story, which is insanely obvious. And no, it didn't just go to Mozambique. The condoms weren't even part of this process, other than a small part of a larger program that wasn't about. And none of this should be okay. I disagree with all of it, despite that being the way they misrepresent the point. But it looks like they added context. So for those that were still even saying it wasn't true, here's even the fact check from Twitter. Post is misleading. And we already went through all of it. Not to Reuters News Company, despite how they continue to put that. Now, yes, I still argue that the money did probably trickle down, and if they wanted it to anyway. But if that matters, then it should matter, and all of them should be held accountable for it who are involved, which mostly Trump in this case, but it's not unique to partisanship, guys. These agendas continue. All of them. Right now, they're tearing things down so they can rebuild it a different way. That's what I believe is happening. We just went over this one. But here he is posting on the 22nd. Just a meme of an image of Reuters, but within the Reuters letters, it just says lies, 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 lies. Yeah, probably. All of these media platforms are manipulated, and it's not just left or right. It's all of them, in my opinion. But since he wants to keep and this is what I mean with the meme. The last thing they pointed out to with Reuters has very clearly been something they lied about. But the team doesn't care. It's all part of the meme, right? The meme keeps going. So for that sake, let's look for a couple more. Okay. Here's some new ones I found. This one for the same group, actually. Thomas Reuters Special Services. For federal supply schedule contract, it says, oh, look at that. They haven't continued. More administrative action, federal supply schedule contract. Now, it does continue to say 0, but it's been saying that for a while. They're continuing the engagement. That's the smaller one. But just to show you that if this was some problematic propaganda thing that they stopped from the Democrats, why would they have now twice engaged with it and kept it going? Good question. But this one's actual funding. And this one's even more specifically to the point. Not Reuters Thomas Special Services, but actual Reuters News and Media Inc. And it even says Newswire Services. We've shown you more of these in the past. These are different ones. Look at that. February 13th, $733,000 to Reuters News Services for, what do you look? Providing Newswire services. Isn't that just like Politico? No, I guarantee this is going to get no attention. It'll never, because it's a minor thing. But it wasn't a minor thing when you made this bombastic claim about the political overlap. I care about both of them, all of them. And I also am honest enough to point out that we don't know for sure with a real breakdown. It could have very well been for Newswire services. I think it's always a potential manipulation. We should ask both. But if one matters, so does the other, right? If Trump is spending at February 13th, a couple weeks ago, $733,000 to continue funding a Reuters Newswire service for the government, explain to me why it makes sense for Elon Musk to be saying that Reuters is fake news or lies. Did I just have that open? There it is. Lies, 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 which I happen to agree. It's just so infuriating that you all see it. It's obvious. We all recognize it, but it will never go anywhere because we live in a very controlled, manipulated dynamic right now. But share the link. Show everybody. Get it shared. It's a small thing, but my point is that if we want to call out what they're doing and highlight the contradiction, then this should matter. And I think some Republicans would care to see, well, wait a minute. Yeah, that's what we just got mad about. Why is he doing it now? Well, there you go. There's a lot of reasons around this. Now, this is something I wanted to go through. Let's take a second. I wanted to go through this. I found this to be a good article, and it's interesting, and there's points that are, as always, there's things that I don't block. It's any article, there's going to be things that we don't agree with, but it's about the data, as always, and it's worth considering. Now, we've been making a point about this. The article's entitled from the New Republic, "The Law's Trump-Size Hole is Suddenly Exposed." Now, it's important to stand back and think about how this works. And think about how, whether or not you think he's accomplishing the right things, whether or not you think he's trying to accomplish a certain thing that you want, as Catherine's continued to highlight, for two reasons, it matters how you get there. No, I mean, obviously for more than two reasons, even just from a moral integrity perspective, it obviously matters. This is not the Machiavellian mindset. The ends do not justify the means. That's not how this works, but they're all pushing that in. That's the same thing with Yarvin and the whole elitist saving us from elitist, but it feels very manufactured. To me, it's also about whether or not what he does is it going to last, right? If you just write executive orders, well, how long until some new administration just writes them all back? It's very simple. That's why I make that point about the women's sports point that I very much agreed with. I still argue that if you were going to do it right and not just let the next Democrat administration roll it right back with a new thing, then we should have actually made this happen through a legal dynamic. And I even argue that there's plenty of Democrats at this point that actually see that it's not what we said it was, or that they, rather, the way I see it is they're opportunists and they recognize that it's not as there's not as much support as there was before. My point is, I'm willing to bet you they could have got that passed in Congress, especially since they have the most support you can essentially have for, both houses in general, most support. Well, I guess maybe save for it. They have a hell of a lot of support, an almost unprecedented amount in regard to being able to pass something. But instead, it goes through the same process that we all used to criticize, including them, which is rule by executive order. So consider this and how this might hurt, even if you believe what he's doing, the thing you want to accomplish. Now, it says, after its initial blitzkrieg of executive orders, the Trump administration has increasingly found itself stuck in the soft mud of judicial scrutiny. Whether the president and his allies will decide to openly defy these constraints is another question, an open question. Earlier this month, for example, Judge Amir Ali ordered the USAID to unfreeze its funds. Now, we briefly pointed to that, but it doesn't get much attention because they didn't care, which is just the first point. It just seems wild to me because this is how this is supposed to work. Now, as the same point from before, I'm always open to the conversation of whether it should be that way. For anything, we all should be. And we can all stand our ground and say, nope, this is what it should be because of X, Y, and Z. But I'm always open to it. My point being, it's worth having a conversation whether we think that the power structure and whether it should be shifted. Right now, it seems very clear that all these Republicans want Trump's word to be absolute. So you want an authoritarian dictatorship. Okay. Even though you wouldn't call it that. So at this point, we do understand, at least how it's presented, that there's supposed to be checks and balances. And that's why the Musk situation is very uncomfortable for people that are just concerned about the Constitution, the structure of our government, that there is no checks and balances of these people. There is no oversight, and it's wild. But the judge aspect is how this is always supposed to have gone. And it's going to get into it about whether there is a judicial aspect to whether, I mean, look, if they didn't have this overview, the check and balance dynamic, then we could effectively just have a dictatorship because they could just go, well, I'm in charge. And that's what other countries end up going through. And I think we're about to go there too. Whether you think Trump is doing it on purpose or not, or being led by some other country that wants to see the collapse of this country, it's hard to tell. But he says, or it continues to write that the USAID, the judge had called for them to unfreeze those funds while litigation continued, which, by the way, is absolutely within their legal boundaries, of course, especially when it's something that needs to flesh out. But it says multiple aid groups told the court that no such actions have been taken. So the Trump administration just didn't even care, didn't even flinch. The State Department, which has taken control of the formerly independent agency, which, again, the reality is, guys, the State Department, even on the record, if you look to the background, has always basically controlled this because it is a part of the foreign policy of this country. It's part of the war state. Now, my point is all they really did was just pull that mask off. That's what we're all kind of trying to highlight for people. But it says, later said that all the grants had been frozen department-wide as part of a temporary review. But see, even that people rightly point out is there's no legal basis for that. If you're going to freeze these things, which were approved by Congress, well, then there should be you don't just go freeze everything until we figure it all out. That was a way to I think that was a way to appease the masses of wanting to see some massive USAID is done. And then not do that, even though that's obvious now, it got that win in the moment. But it says, Ali nonetheless reiterated his order last week for USAID to unfreeze the money. So he followed up as the judicial ruling and said, you have to unfreeze this money, at least until we flesh this out in court. It says, despite the government's efforts to the contrary, the court was not inviting defendants, he says, to continue the suspension while they reviewed contracts and legal authorities to come up with a new post hoc rationalization for the en masse suspension. So he's calling him out, saying, right now they're scrambling to try to find some new justification for why it needs to continue and not shutting it down in the process. Now, he says that to the extent defendants have continued the blanket suspension, they are ordered to immediately cease it. Now, it says Judge John McConnell also received intense pushback in recent weeks after he ruled that the Trump administration was defying his temporary order to release federal funds blocked by the White House in January. Vice President Vance claimed on Twitter that, quote, and this is where it gets interesting, judges, he says, aren't allowed to control, which is not what they're doing, executives' legitimate power. Well, while a White House spokesperson said that any legal challenges to Trump's executive orders was, quote, nothing more than an attempt to undermine the will of the American people. It's all this bombastic talk from politicians. They're basically pointing to a very common back and forth process, which basically demonstrates the check and balance of the way our government works and calling it something new. Now, if you understand my perspective, as much as people who are Republicans who want to make it out to be siding with Democrats because we don't like Trump, who are so blind in this conversation, you know well as I that my opinion is that the government dynamic I don't agree with. I do not believe I'm of a more anarchistic mindset for where the world should be. But if we are forced to live in the system that we have right now, you do need some kind of overlapping balance to it. Otherwise, you end up with a dictatorship, an authoritarian reality. But it's important. It's always important for me to say that. I would not choose to live in this dynamic if it was up to me. That's why I point to the Constitution and things like that, that if we are, I don't see anything that has been this successful in the context of at least giving you the semblance of some kind of control or a, freedom, liberty dynamic. But it says no federal judge has held the Trump administration in contempt or court for its defiance so far, which I find interesting, though the possibility remains. Oh, and then his point about they aren't allowed to control executives' legitimate power. They're not controlling anything. They're simply ruling on whether what they're doing is actually unconstitutional, which is their only job. So it's a funny thing. To me, this is them or somebody else driving them to destroy everything that holds this country together. No federal judge has held him in contempt yet, though the possibility remains. It is also possible, of course, that the White House will ultimately bend to adverse judicial rulings against its top policy priorities. Now, if that happens, I honestly think that that's a good thing. That ultimately that they recognize that it's at least not in their interest right now to push the issue. But I kind of think that's not going to happen. It says, if it doesn't, however, the courts will find it extraordinarily difficult, and this is why, to enforce their own rulings against the administration or any of the White House's allies for that matter. And here's why. In normal circumstances, courts would have multiple tools to enforce compliance from defiant litigants. Outside of the White House, obviously. But so in normal context, judges can find people in contempt of court for disobeying their orders or interfering with their proceedings. Now, I'll be the first to say that's abused all the time. In no way am I going, you guys already know this, but for those that may be new, never hear this as siding with one thing or the other. It's about trying to read through in an objective way and consider the pros and cons of all of it. Now, the reality being that in many cases, the way this is working is what's used to check more power on the executive branch. At the same time, it's obvious to see the judicial branch in many, 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 many cases have abused exactly that. In some cases, just not liking somebody's tone or that they wore a certain shirt. It gets abused all the time. And it could result in fines or imprisonment. Now, it says they can instruct the U.S. Marshal Service to bring in fugitives, to carry out warrants, and to ensure that the federal judiciary's orders are generally complied with. Because the way you have to look at this, and it does say it in a second, is that the judiciary, the judges are ultimately about trying to uphold the law through the Constitution, essentially, rather, not even the law, the Constitution. The executive branch is supposed to carry out and uphold those orders and those rulings. Now, really, we've gotten to a point where the federal government is just, it's a corporation. And, the fact that we have the Bureau of Land Management, for example, which in my opinion is entirely unconstitutional. So too, realistically, would be the federal government if you want to be real about it. But that's the point. We've gotten to a reality now where these things don't matter because the power structure is consolidated so much. That's why we have executive orders after executive orders. And now I think we're seeing the first example of really taking that mask off and going, well, you know what? We don't care what you're saying. Looking around going, no one's going to do anything about it. So now, does that sound like that's in the interest of this country? Like, even if, again, you think Trump is going to succeed in what you think he's doing, what does that do to the fabric of what arguably has allowed this country to be the way it was? Now, who might have an interest in doing that? Now, again, people, you might reflexively think China. Let's consider it. But ask yourself whether or not there is something that is influencing this decline. And then I believe you'll find a lot of very obvious examples that we'll go through. But it says that they can ensure that the federal judge's orders are generally complied with. And it says perhaps the most extraordinary example of this power came in 1906. The Supreme Court agreed to review the case of Ed Johnson, a black man who had been convicted of rape in Tennessee under, highly dubious circumstances. After learning of the high court's intervention, the sheriff at the time, Joseph Shipp, allowed a lynch mob to enter the jail and then hang the man from the local bridge. The justices, outraged by the defiance, at the time was backed by Theodore Roosevelt, brought Shipp and his associates to Washington, D.C. and they tried him for contempt of court. He and a handful of others were actually sentenced to between 2 and 3 months in prison. Imagine that, for murdering a person. To this day, United States v. Shipp remains the only criminal trial ever conducted by the Supreme Court. That's just interesting in its own right. The justices theoretically retain the power to conduct similar trials in the future. The reason they mention that is that if there is actual back and forth, you could argue that I don't think it'll ever get there, whether or not they get to this point, because I don't think the executive branch will bend. That's my worry ultimately. But I think you could see this coming to pass if this keeps going back and forth, because this is ultimately the level it could get to. I kind of just don't think it will for many reasons on both sides. But it says, but do not expect to see Chief Justice John Roberts presiding over a criminal trial of Trump anytime soon. Constraining the executive branch is a different beast. Constitutionally speaking, finding the White House in contempt of court is like describing a new color. The primary function of the presidency is to enforce federal law. I'd say or uphold the rulings of the judicial branch, but it says whether it be the acts of Congress or the rulings of the federal courts. Even then, there are degrees of injury. A president can defy Congress without causing irreparable damage because some friction between the elected branches is built into the constitutional system. If the president defies the courts and Congress does not impeach him, which is the first point you'd expect, right? So where if he like right now, doesn't even acknowledge the first one, doesn't respond to the second one, that's where Congress, not a partisan Congress, which is what we always seem to have, where many of them just will side with Trump no matter what. But a Congress that we like to pretend is really just about enforcing the law will stand up and go, well, clearly what he's doing is not okay, so we're going to impeach him for it. And then usually the process, just the threat would make him pull back. But that's not happening. It says the Constitution simply ceases to exist if Congress does not stand up and enforce when the executive branch is doing something wrong. A good example of that is how the executive branch has brought us to war. I mean, really, depending on how you frame that, many, many, many times since World War II without any actual declaration of war from Congress. That is a crime. Congress has never done anything about it. So we are long past that, and that is why people like us have been saying for a long time that it's not that they're destroying it, but that the Constitution basically doesn't exist when it comes to the way this actually, it's something they use to keep you in line and break and ignore whenever they want. And we've seen that all over the place with anti-Semitism laws, and again, who has an interest in that? Definitely not even, look, I would even argue not the president, unless you're working on the behalf of somebody else. Now, it says there is no backup president whom a judge could call to enforce subpoenas or warrants if the regular one won't do it, because that's the highest level of power. So if they're the one on the hook and there's nobody there to enforce it, this is an interesting situation. Now, it says it functionally exists as an agency of the Justice Department. Oh, no, sorry, I skipped a line. While the U.S. Marshal Service is best known for carrying out the judiciary, it functionally exists as an agency of the Justice Department. And its Senate-confirmed officials can ultimately be fired by Donald Trump. So the very arm in which they would use to go after the person not responding is basically hireable and fireable by Trump himself. So it says there is no reason to believe it would be immune to his will. And even those people would probably bend because they don't want to lose their jobs. It says last month, the acting marshal for D.C. reportedly visited multiple judges' chambers to directly pressure them to speed up the releases of the January 6th prisoners. So that you can see that that's being the Trump administration calling for that. It says pardons can also be used to nullify the judiciary's orders. Federal judges have the inherent power to hold defiant litigants and witnesses in criminal contempt of court. There's also civil contempt of court. Now that's important. They're going to touch on. Seems like the only way that they might be able to go after anybody like Trump doing this. But it says Trump has already shown a willingness to pardon people for that offense. The first pardon that he issued during his first term went to, as you remember, Joe. How do you say it? Arpaio, the sheriff, who became a national figure for, as they frame in this article, his anti-immigration policies. But that's debatable for many reasons. It says a federal court convicted the Arizona sheriff of criminal contempt in July 2017, simply for defying a federal court order to stop racially profiling Hispanic drivers. Which again, there's obvious things that did happen, but whether or not you feel that the person is, the point is, there's always nuance to a conversation. And I think that these policies in many ways are inherently biased towards whether racial or otherwise. My point though, is that he got called out for that, whether or not you agree with it, and defied it. So before he could be sentenced up to 6 months in jail, which again, this is how crazy this is. Whether or not you agree with it, the point is, legally speaking, the court's in the right because he didn't respond. Even if you disagree with who appointed the judge and so on, this is how the system is supposed to work. And the moment you start breaking these aspects, it shows you that there really is they are the highest level of power and they can do whatever they want. And that's not how this is supposed to work, or at least as we're told, right? But he stepped in, Trump, and gave him a full pardon. Not because what he did was wrong or right, but because Trump saw a political ally. And it says, citing his history of serving his country. He even previewed the move at a rally, and asked his supporters, so was he convicted for doing his job? Well, that's not the point, though. Was he or was he not racially profiling these people based on their skin? See, the point is that that's advantageous for Trump's side because there's a lot of support for that explicitly in his administration. So it says, I'll make a prediction. It goes, I think he's going to be just fine. And then he pardoned him. It's not hard to imagine Trump's logic of doing his job being applied to his appointees carrying out his orders, whether or not they're actually legal. It says the president's ability to issue pardons and commutations is arguably his least constrained constitutional power. Acts of executive clemency cannot be overturned by the courts or by Congress, which I argue, and I always have, is insane. The idea that they can just pardon, remember, and actually this one was a step too far. Everybody caught notice of it, but to pardon people like Fauci for just anything they may be charged with, which honestly, I don't think Trump was ever going to do it anyway, but that's the way they get to pretend that Trump wasn't because of X, Y, and Z. It's just this, that's the government playing your partisan thing against you, in my opinion. But the point is that you can just do that. And Trump did the same thing last time. Very dangerous and bad people in many cases, just because it's advantageous for them, or Israel stuff that we saw. But how is that okay? Even if there's a crime, we just decide, because no, that's not how this is supposed to work. But it says the explicit constraints in the Constitution are that pardons can only be issued for offenses against the United States, meaning they only apply to federal crimes and not state ones, and that they do not apply to cases of impeachment. Even so, issuing pardons for contempt of court might seem like an implicit violation of the separation of powers. But you see, these are things that aren't even being really discussed right now. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has disagreed, and this is where it gets especially interesting. In 1925, a case, ex parte Grossman, the justices reviewed a pardon issued by, at that time, President Coolidge for a Chicago saloon owner who had ignored federal court orders to stop selling alcohol during Prohibition. Newspaper accounts at the time suggested that the pardon came after a friendly senator urged Coolidge to intervene, which is typically how power works. Judge, at the time, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who would become more famous, as you guys might have seen in different movies or different coverage, the first commissioner of baseball. And there's a whole dishonest criminal overlap to the whole thing. But it says ruled that the pardon was unconstitutional and ordered Grossman to be imprisoned. A group of federal district court judges later upheld that decision, castigating the executive branch for its infringement upon the judiciary's prerogatives. But it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules it down. But they say before that, to allow such power in the executive is to strike a death blow to the independence of the judiciary, which again, regardless of the politics of it all, trying to be apolitical about it, you can see that there is a violation and even a law that's broken. And then you can also see power stepping in and going, let him go, right? And then the point is they go, no, this is clearly, if you step over this, none of it means anything. Now it goes past that, and it says Judge James Wilkinson, who wrote a concurring opinion, said that he agreed with every word, basically saying, this ruins the balance of power. And it says Grossman and the Justice Department then went to the Supreme Court. And then, see, this is the point. This is where you get the power structure using their power. And it says Chief Justice William Taft, writing in the court, rejected every other ruling and ordered his release. He concluded that the Constitution's description of, quote, crimes against the United States should be read as broadly as possible and not limited merely to the offenses defined by Congress and federal law, such as contempt of court. Taft's ruling was highly deferential to the executive branch, of course, an approach that is perhaps unsurprising since he had previously led it. And that you see that overlap for sure. And it says he argued against a strict separation of powers, not noting that the various branches had tools to check and balance each other, and that the pardon power was one of them. Taft also rejected as fanciful the idea that his interpretation could be used maliciously by a future president. Now, I will point out that you could argue, as much as I don't agree necessarily, that the pardon power itself is one of those checks. So, well, let's just say you have a Congress or a judiciary branch that's out of control in some way, that then they can say, well, I'm going to pardon him because that's how it's supposed to work. There's always one way back and forth that it could be balanced, even though we know that's not really how it works. But the interesting part in this is that you could see that basically he says, and I'll read the quote directly, that it's not a problem because we will never be in a point, it's improbable, where a president will do what Trump is doing today. Now it says, quote, if it be said that the president, by successive pardons of constantly recurring contempts in particular litigation, might deprive a court of power to enforce its orders in a recalcitrant neighborhood, it is enough to observe that such a course is so improbable as to furnish but little basis for argument. He said, and then he says, the article continues, even in the unlikely event that a president actively sought to thwart judicial rulings, which is really the point, regardless of whether it's about contempt of court or what we're talking about. It says, the Chief Justice explained the other branches could still check him, but that's also not happening today. It says, quote, exceptional cases like this, still referencing the 1926 case, if to be imagined at all, or actually, no, I take it back. He's referencing in a future that a president would do what Trump's doing today. He says exceptional cases like this, saying that is the highly improbable point. If to be imagined at all, he says, would suggest a resort to impeachment rather than to a narrow and strained construction of the general powers of the president. Taft continued, and it says, in other words, even more unimaginable to him than a rogue, lawless president was a Congress that would do nothing to constrain him. Both of which seem to be happening right now. And it says, at the same time, Taft noted that a pardon power could not be used to completely evade a court sanctions. For criminal contempt, he writes, the sentence is punitive in the public interest to vindicate the authority of the court to deter other like derelictions. For civil contempts, however, the punishment is remedial and for the benefit of the complaint, and a pardon cannot stop it, arguing that you could have a civil effort. But Trump's a very rich person. I mean, they'll mostly amount in fines. I don't think it'll stop him, but something. It says civil contempt differs, and it goes on to make that point. And it says that their coercive power would be limited when the president is involved, and the courts would still depend on other actors to enforce their will. Congress, in theory, could supplement the judiciary's authority in such a showdown. It says, but with its own, Richard Nixon complied with the Supreme Court's order to turn over the White House tapes to a grand jury during the Watergate crisis, which obviously ended up in his impeachment, in part because lawmakers would impeach him if he didn't, which happened anyway. But it says that likely won't happen this time. Over the last month, Republican members of Congress have introduced articles of impeachment in response to the court's orders, but against the judges who issued them. So basically exactly what they thought was that improbable is not only happening, but now they're actually going the other direction and trying to impeach the judges that had the rulings. Which, again, I'm obviously going to point the political leanings of everybody today, and it's obvious. But the reality is the same, that they're in the position, that the ruling is based on the legal standing, and that they rule based on the way they see it. And that's why there are other courts and just like every other dynamic. For them to immediately jump to impeachment is a threat and is meant to send a message to every other judge to fall in line. We are watching a coup take place in front of us, guys. This is a very clear transition of power. Now it says the Constitution and the framers who drafted it did a decent job at devising a structure for government that would allow the different branches to check one another to preserve liberty. No constitutional text is well written enough to save the rule of law when the American people elect a president who, again, I don't even think that's the way it went, but a president who doesn't believe in the Constitution, especially when he is joined by Congress that refuses to hold him accountable for violating it. Now, the main point to make from the very beginning, like I said many times, is that if you're like, the conversation should be had. If you're in a position where, as I agree, everything's already broken and by design, whether it's because of Israel or because your government, whatever you want, whatever the outcome is it not worthy of consideration that maybe that's the only way you can actually change something? Certainly a point to make. And as usual, then we'd wait and see what actually happened. But every step so far, when you start to work with the people that we knew were bad guys, or you start to make the things that we thought we were all fighting, and you start to build out the structure that we were all afraid of, these are the points that we're talking about. And those points can begin to show you that we're not going in that direction. But again, maybe those will materialize into some deep state fighting dynamic. I don't see that happening. My point is the same, guys, is that we can see the path. And we can see that this is not going in the direction. It's obvious that this is undermining the very things that they said they were fighting for. So I hope at the very least that you can stand back and go, okay, I agree that your mind is that that's the only way it can be done. And maybe you're right. But I'm hoping that you'll still be honest enough to check them along the way, seeing as how nobody else there's no more checks and balances don't seem to work anymore. Call these things out. And hopefully, if it does go the wrong direction, we can stop it because enough people see it. But I mean, I think we all need to be a little concerned about how obvious this is going against what we used to argue or what Republicans would have said was necessary when Biden was in power. That just shows hypocrisy, in my opinion. Now, on that same point, and really the point that I think is what's most important here around who is very transparently, like, again, my opinion's obvious. That's why I wrote the title the way I did today. But I'm still, as always, trying to be objective and frame these things in a way that doesn't just force my opinion into your mind, right? Is that I just think that it's obvious these things don't align with what we're fighting. I do think that somebody's influencing this because it's clearly in their benefit. But just first, before we get into the Israel part that I see, just ask yourself first and foremost if you think that's happening. And if it is it just okay because you believe that Trump's doing it for the right reasons? Now, that all being said, that we can transparently see, even from very clear Trump supporters, that this is a Zionist administration more than we've ever seen before. Proudly, emotionally, bombastically pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, everywhere you look. Even to the point to where the prime minister continues to come out and say, congratulations to Patel and Bongino for being confirmed, which they don't do for every politician, guys. I think that's a very obvious standout sign. But I want you to consider this as we go through whether you think this is America first and what's happening, or every other we've talked about, or Israel first. Now, here's Dan Bongino. Dan Cohen pointed this out and says, I've never once interacted with Dan Bongino. He once retweeted my work for exposing Peter Hotez. Soon after, he blocked me. That's Dan speaking. He goes, now I know why. And you've probably seen this going around. This is Dan Bongino speaking in a podcast about what in his heart, does he care about most?
That's right. What cause is dear to your heart?
Cause is dear to my Israel, the defense of Israel.
What is number one?
Well, that's pretty interesting. The number one close to your heart, Israel, defense of Israel. Why? I don't even know why that makes sense to anybody. How is that the first thing? I mean, I think the answer is obvious. He just got confirmed. Here's another clip. Now, this one's interesting. We talked about it this morning. This is him on Timcast floating this ambiguous point about the connection to Epstein. And we're going to talk about Epstein in a minute, about the seemingly non-existent ongoing point, about the transparency, whatever they're calling their little thing. But listen to what he says here. And ask, especially today, but even then, how the deviation, this kind of like the sidestep, the pulling of the punch right where it matters, And I argue today, especially now that he's in this Zionist administration, that this is suddenly going to, this point won't even be brought up.
A year and a half after that.
And by the way, shout out to No More News you can see his URL on the clip. You'll find not a single person pointing to No More News when they share that clip, even though everybody's sharing it right now. Typical mainstream alternative media.
I'm in a green room at Fox, and I'm not going to say who because they didn't give me permission to share it. But the short story, but not who they are. It says, Epstein's an intelligence asset for people in the Middle East, right? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I'm like, you sure of that? The person, let's say, is like, I'm absolutely sure of that. That he's either a witting or unwitting asset, intelligence asset, meaning his plane and that island, the cameras, there's a big assumption out there that these videotapes were exclusively in the custody of Epstein. That's a huge mistake. The reason they wanted this story to go away is because there's an assumption like, oh yeah, Epstein had him. No, he wasn't the only one who had him, according to this source. These assets, that's why this blackmail story makes so much sense. Which Middle Eastern countries they are, I don't know. But this person, who's a very, very good reporter, I mean, aces, right? Swore Epstein was either a witting or unwitting intelligence asset, and they may have had his plane wired up, and they're the ones who have all this stuff. So the point is, to sum it up, how do you know some of these countries aren't going to some of these power players who aren't making decisions? Because, hey, you wouldn't want this video out there, right? How do you know?
100%.
I mean,
let's get personal. Anyway, let's talk about something not Israel. Tim jumps in, right? Let's deviate anywhere else because we know what everyone's thinking right now. He's such a what do you call it? What's the term for that? I forget. I'm blanking on it right now. Like a wall, like he's blocking. There's a term. Can't jump into my head. But I mean, obviously, guys. I mean, let's not forget. Acosta openly stated Mossad CIA intelligence overlap. Okay, this was, and they even said on the record that I'm not supposed to say. I was told I'm not supposed to say. It's incredible, right? So my point is, now he said this, right? So now that he's a part of this administration with this fake JFK, Epstein breaking dynamic, is this going to come out? Or is it going to be laid at the feet of some, country that's working on behalf of Israel? I mean, how is this going to work? But I find that really interesting that you can't. Everything about that. Obviously, the blackmail network. And you have to realize that what they're talking about is evidence on, it's objectively bipartisan. That should matter, especially with the way they're framing all of this. Now, here is Bongino being confirmed, or said, actually, this was, which one was this? Was that the confirmation? Anyway, the point was just to highlight that there, for some reason, he's sitting next to Eric Prince. And this is Pauly breaking this down, saying Eric Prince beside Bongino. Prince has his hands all over the entire narrative network. He's a mercenary, the contacts all over the world. And I agree. And here is a point that I want to reiterate that Whitney wrote for TLAV in 2023, The Prince and the Spy. That's Eric Prince and an Israeli spy. And the point is, transparently, the overlapping of the startup intelligence, basically, of Israel and their cybersecurity and their tech startups and their energy companies and Carbine 911, which is one of the things we're talking about here, or Comframe Solutions, are companies that are intertwined all across this country that are actually very clearly Israeli intelligence fronts. Or not even fronts, but Israel, they're businesses that actually run, but serve as an overlap for Israeli intelligence. And I'll read it directly from the actual article. That's just highlighted from Whitney, what Whitney wrote. Here's the article that she sources. Oh, did it stop highlighting in there? That's silly. Here, I'll just read it from here. Well, here, let's do the in some cases so you guys can see it. Okay, so it says, these things right here. Most of the company's top managers, I'll start with this. The Israeli military competes with the standards of compensation applicable to commercial companies. And when wages are on the rise, the military is hard-pressed to offer competitive compensation. A ranking officer who is in the charge of this interview, so they're just citing what he said right here. And it goes, most of the company's top managers are veterans of Israeli military technology units. Now, the article is actually entitled, Israel Blurs the Line Between Defense Apparatus and Local Cybersecurity Hub. And it's not just local. That's the point, that there's very clearly a worldwide dynamic. And don't forget that SoftBank essentially seems to be the financial front for all of this, and they're a chief entity of Stargate in the United States. But it goes on to say some of its top managers and employees have started work at the company immediately after having been released from active duty. One of them, the company's chief technology officer for 12 months, ending in June 2017, said in an interview with this platform, Calculist, that he started work at the company less than a day after his release from active duty. Before joining the company, he managed a team of 40 engineers for the Israel's intelligence corps. A former employee of the company said crossing the lines between military service and the employment at the commercial outfit was commonplace while he was working at the company. A former high-ranking Israeli officer, said Israel military currently outsources activities that were previously managed in-house with a focus on software and cyber technologies. That's clear as day. So things that were previously handled inside the Israeli military are now outsourced into these companies around the world. It says in some cases, managers of development projects in the Israeli military and intelligence arms were encouraged to form their own companies, which then took over the project. An Israeli venture capitalist familiar with the matter said, one of the companies formed this way is BC Strategy Limited, also known as Black Cube. I don't think it's connected, but what's that group Strategy that's buying up all the Bitcoin? I don't think it's the same thing, but it just jumped into my head. This is a former Black Cube employee speaking on terms of anonymity, said the Israeli Ministry of Defense contracted the company. Black Cube declined to comment, of course. The point is clearly, this says develop projects once done in-house at the Israeli military and at Israeli intelligence agencies are now also transferred to third-party contractors that have already worked for the Israeli military defense. They are, so basically companies out there are acting for the interest of the Israeli intelligence. And the reason is because they believe they're acting for Israel. And this is where the dual nationality dynamic comes into play. And it should for any country. Why that becomes a racist point when it comes to Israel is the fact they try to overlap it with Jewish religion. It's not the same thing. That's why there's a lot of Orthodox Jewish communities that are calling out the state of Zionist Israel for what it is, not the state of the Jews. And the reality here is that you can see that whether it's a Israeli Zionist or a Chinese military entity, the point is that if they were working through the United States, you would wonder whether they are more concerned for their country than they are in the United States. And it's funny, this point is always considered to be so racist. You know as well as I that any other country's entity, like a Brian Mast, for example, who is literally a part of the IDF, who is working in this country, will eventually come to a point where a decision pulls them in both directions. The question is, which way do they go? That is the most logical thing in the world, whether UK, China, Russia, or Israel. Funny how only one of them is somehow a racist point. Do you think they would allow a member of the Chinese military in this Congress? No. Well, there's a member of the IDF in this Congress. How does that make sense? Here's a clip from James Lee that breaks down a very concerning overlap to this. This is not just about the Unit 8200 Israeli startups. We're going to make a point about the dual nationality in a second. It's about the infiltration of Israeli we actually didn't make a point about this. I had it pulled aside, but never did. The whole Hasbara 2.0. He mentions it in this. Hasbara is it's not a propaganda. It's not a fake thing. It's a word they actually use that basically just frames their propaganda campaigns. Now, they put out a document that got leaked that was about Hasbara 2.0. The reason I ultimately didn't cover it is because you read through it. I swear to God, they're literally presenting everything they do now in barely a different way and acting like it's a new product. They're basically just continuing to lie to you. It was embarrassing. But that's what he highlights. And he shows you that this is one version of this, which is a group acting as an America First entity, a PR group for America First that turns out to just be an Israeli entity. And that's what we're seeing. It's not just startup Israel intelligence companies. It's social media accounts. It's content creators. I mean, it's everywhere. Now, that's not unique to Israel, guys, but it's, I think, more rampant through Israel than I've ever seen in my life. Here's James Lee calling it out.
I'm starting to think that America First doesn't mean what we actually think it means. Check this out. America First PR, America's first anti-woke PR firm. This is their website.
Just always note how that's the real push. Is the anti-woke, they hate the DEI, even though Israel pushes those things all over. For the honestly, again, because I don't think they care about those things. I think it's because they use it for the same things the U.S. government uses for. It's for cover. It's for manipulation. The point, though, is that that's the way they frame this because they know it's going to resonate with the people they're trying to reach and manipulate the most.
It says that America First PR is a conservative public relations media firm. We represent candidates, personalities, and companies who think on the right side of things and are unapologetically patriots. Okay. It's run by this lady named Melissa Rain Lively, and she seems pretty well connected. Here's her with Tulsi Gabbard, our new director of national intelligence. Here's her with Kash Patel, FBI director, RFK Jr., HHS secretary. But just a few years ago, Melissa was just, quote, a Jewish woman who escaped QAnon after it consumed her life. Fast forward a couple years, she's now hanging out with Donald Trump, Dana White, Elon Musk, and Mar-a-Lago. I wonder how she got there. I wonder, just perhaps, maybe, did it have something to do with this situation? The new Hasbara 2.0, so to speak. Losing the war for public opinion abroad, Israel is relaunching a heavily funded plan to disguise its own propaganda behind the facade of foreign agents. Because
that was the one primary difference, even though it was already kind of happening, was the very hard lean into this, to funding people like this, or, I mean, look, if you can't see the overlap to people like this, or maybe a politician, it's the same agenda. They're trying to reach, influence, and co-opt anybody that will influence the conversation. Politicians, that's old news. They've been doing that a long time. This is the effort to do so in more broad way, but it was a document they outlined. I mean, and the funny thing is, you read it, it's outright dishonest, but that's the reality. I mean, it's very easy to see.
Yeah, a lot of times she's looking pretty MAGA, pretty America first. But if you dig deep, a lot of her posts seem to be about an entirely different country altogether. An incredible day at the Knesset in Jerusalem, working on strategies to strengthen the impenetrable friendship, business relationships, sports, and cultural ties between the U.S. and Israel. 2024 was a year of relentless hard work and determination that yields great rewards. Hashtag America First, hashtag Israel Forever. Daddy T says it ends Sunday. Time to get terrorists. In case you didn't notice, these are not American troops. So yeah, America First PR. I don't know. Something seems off here. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, is it not weird to honest people who actually believe America First to see all of these very clear, like aggressively pro-Israel Zionists screaming America First when everything they do is for Israel? I mean, look at all the people in his administration. All of their very first actions. Pam Bondi was making a task force to go after October 7th. It was like the first thing she did, or called Netanyahu or went to visit Netanyahu. I mean, how in the world does that not concern you? If that was Russia, obviously you'd be like, what? How in the world does that make sense? It shouldn't be any different, guys. It's not America First. It's something else. Now, this was interesting. He writes this, the PSA, what he just said, this isn't just influence, it's infiltration. I agree. This person says the same group is funding many viral Twitter accounts. And he just says, name them. And this person just simply highlights the Misfit Patriot, which I don't think that's actually not the main account. That's the different, anyway, you've probably heard of him as a larger kind of MAGA group. And then one that I think is important to highlight, the Palestinian News Network, which we recently referenced. I even note that the way that their @ symbol is Pali News Network, which is far too close to Pollywood, which is what they use to make fun of Palestinians. The reality is this is not a Palestinian support network. It is a clear propaganda Zionist-run account that is, they were the ones that were making fun of the Bebas children being killed, and all the people in their comments were like, what are you doing? You're hurting our cause. They don't. Okay? This is a Zionist account, and that's how they do this. Other Zionists were pointing at this account saying, see, here's what the Palestinians think. That's how they work this. The point, though, is that you can see right here, I said, and we had just talked about this. Here's the Zionist on February 23rd saying, the Palestinian movement has now evolved to the second stage. They're coming for you. See how this works? Because they want you to think that they're now not just Hamas, but Palestinians are sneaking through the border and they're going to come. It is a clear agenda for Israel, for the United States, for a lot of what they're doing. He says, if you don't hate white people, please unfollow. Are you kidding me? Like, how transparent is that? And I simply said, since we just referenced this account, I said, and there it is. We were just discussing this Zionist-run fake Palestinian account. Zionist propaganda is always so reactive and transparent. If you pay attention, you can see it coming from a mile away. Now, 12 Ball includes a great thread that goes through a lot of these different things. I'm not going to get into all of it, but some of the points we were just making. Points out our new FBI director's girlfriend works for an Israeli intelligence front. Now, his point is Prager's CEO, Marissa Straight, is IDF intelligence. You can look this up for yourself. When Danny Prager visited Israel, he was recruited to go to the USSR and covertly pass info to and from Jewish dissidents. Prager used first video was a history of Israel funded by Adam Milstein, who also funds Hezbollah fellowships. PragerU. These things don't have to be certainly could mean other things, right? But when you stand back and look at all that we keep seeing, this has to start raising red flags when you have people at the highest levels of power in every context. Or, Trump himself funded hundreds of billions of dollars from Miriam Adelson, has now allowed them to go after the West Bank. We're going to get to in a minute. We're now seeing, as we told you it would happen. They're now about to end the ceasefire based on the situation that Israel created. Why? It's the beginning of the second phase. That's what the plan was, and they're all telling you that. You have to realize how these people, the amount of influence to Israel is staggering. Whether we're talking about Bongino or Patel or Trump or Vance or Elon or any of them, Teal, the whole damn thing. I'm not talking like weak like Israel, but like aggressive, or Hegseth, a rabidly pro-frothing at the mouth biblical Zionist, tells them they have a biblical right to territory that's not theirs. This is terrifying stuff. So he highlights that. He points out America First, more about PragerU's status as a Hezbollah organization, and he's just going into more detail about that overlap. He points out, where's the other one? I'm just kind of go through it reasonably quick. He points out the clip about Bongino, basically saying Israel is what he cares about the most. That's the clip we just showed you. There's one other point. Just go through it. There's different points. Here's Ian Carroll saying something about Bongino, which again, sort of like gaslighting for Bongino. Bongino said it perfectly about Epstein, really, by not mentioning Israel. Anyway, it's a good thread. There's a lot more in there. I just want to point out that overlap, as well as the overarching point that we always highlight here, guys, which is that there's no way you could pretend this makes any sense. It's always been bipartisan. This was February 3rd. We've already talked about it all. Justice Department announces formation of a task force to combat anti-Semitism. So you roll in the new rebel fighting the deep state administration and immediately take actions in every way that help Israel at the expense of American interests, including your free speech. But keep telling yourself it's all going to work out. I hope it does, but the actions continue to show me the opposite. Now, on the point of dual nationality or dual loyalty, WikiLeaks just put this out. I find this to be very important. It's from Australia. It's exactly the point. And it actually flushes out to make the point. WikiLeaks shared this. A Jewish Australian army officer has been stripped of his top secret clearance by a review tribunal, which found he, quote, had divided loyalties between Australia and Israel and posed an unacceptable and avoidable risk to security due to the threat of recruitment by Mossad. Now, the immediate reflexive response from people that are blindly pro-Israel are going to say, you did it because you hate Jewish people. That's the only thing that they can say. It's not true. Because if you actually read and do your due diligence, like they never will, he says himself in the discussion that he would give information to Israel and then let them know. And then gets basically after being I'll read it to you myself. It says, in his defense, the officer told the tribunal that Zionism is an essential theme within Judaism, which it's not. It is for Zionists, but it is not for, there's plenty of Orthodox Jewish organizations that call out Zionism every day, major ones that exist around the world. They're in Israel, for crying out loud. They get beat up by the IDF all the time, which shows you as always that it's about Zionism and not Judaism. If you haven't heard us talk about it, I recommend you look into our many different conversations about the historical and provable reality that Zionism is a manipulation of Judaism. It says Judaism mandates the loyalty of a Jew. This is what he was saying, by the way. That's why it's important. Zionism is an essential theme within Judaism. Judaism mandates the loyalty of a Jew to his people and to the land of Israel. The Australian government is aware that every Jew harbors a varying degree of loyalty to Israel. Some have a higher and more overt levels of loyalty than others. This is the latent risk that the Australian government must naturally accept when employing Jews. That's what he said on the record. Now, on my point, in a way, that is exactly how Zionism works. What that will do to someone who doesn't know what's really driving this bus, it'll make them angry at Jewish people, because it'll make you think, so you have to treat them as some separate special case because of the way that's not how it's Zionism that's doing that. There, again, are Jewish groups that we keep highlighting that call this out. So even if you think that's only 1%, you have to still acknowledge that it's not all Jewish people in the conversation. But when you stand back, you'll quickly find out that it seems to be a rapidly growing number. And anyone that cares to look begins to rapidly understand that the history paints the picture for you. Now, when you're watching them commit genocide, it becomes even easier to go back and look. But here's what it actually says. And again, this is WikiLeaks, which I think has its own credence to it. Here's the actual breakdown. You can read it all for yourself, as we tend to do for this chat. Well, WikiLeaks shared it, but we'll include the links for you to look at. Here's the main points they highlighted. What we just read, it says allowing Jews to serve in the ADF must come, don't confuse the AFD, since we just talked about that, must come with an understanding that the Jew will have, this is what he said himself, the Jew will have a level of loyalty to the Jewish nation and for the state of Israel. Now, that is the case for most Zionists, but not for all Jewish people. Now, it says just as our ethnic groups remain loyalty to their country or origin of their heritage. Now, see, that's a different point. People that grow up in the United States have a loyalty to their country. But a Christian who's born in the United States does not have dual loyalty between their Christianity and this country. Or let's say a person who, it's the same point anywhere else. It's the way this becomes a problem is when you conflate the religion of Judaism with the state of Israel, a nationality, which is not Judaism. And it says the Australian government must appreciate the implications of allowing Jews to serve within the ADF and the associated inherent risk. If the implication of this risk dictate the preference for the ADF to avoid observant Jews who harbor loyalty to the Jewish nation, then this undermines the broader multiculturalism of the ADF workforce. It would then be argued that this policy may be discriminatory to the Jewish people. Well, that's how he's trying to use the very dynamic to push back. But if you actually read this all, they're not making this about Jewish people. They're making this about people who have loyalty to Israel. That's the main point here. And so him conflating that kind of makes the point. But I would argue, just like you can read the thing for yourself, if this was a Jewish person from the United States that lived in Australia that had dual, or rather just even say, let's just say a person born in Australia that had never been to Israel, who is a Jewish person, who not only has Australian nationality, there wouldn't be an issue there. That's the point they're talking about. It's the fact that you have nationality, which is not Judaism, it's Israeli nationality. It's very interesting. But it goes on to say, as stated in the opening remarks, Zionism is an essential theme within Judaism. That's the other point. Judaism mandates the loyalty of a Jew to his people and land of Israel. It says the ASIO would be well aware, that's the group, or the Australian aspect, that most Australian Jews do not volunteer to serve in the ADF. The vast majority of Jews in Australia, if they do serve any national army, serve in the IDF. Now, that's the point again. That's weird. Why? You believe in Judaism and you live in Australia. Why do you feel obligated, or why are you even allowed to go join the ADF? My point is the same. If a Jewish person lived in Australia and they had Australian nationality and did or did not, or maybe chose to work through their military or not, there would not be a problem. It's only when they then also are a part of the IDF or also have Israeli nationality. It's very clear. The only reason this is confusing is because we've spent a century almost of being told we're racist for thinking otherwise, even though we're not. It's obvious. And it says, I elected to serve in the ADF, he says, as if he felt a strong sense of belonging to Australia, and I wanted to give back to the country and demonstrate the importance of serving here in Australia. But he'd already served in the IDF. It says, it seems that events now have to turn on me. He goes, the Australian government is aware that every Jew harbors a varying degree of loyalty to Israel. Some have a higher and more overt levels of loyalty than others. This is what he's saying. This is the latent risk that the Australian government must naturally accept when employing Jews. The revocation of my security clearance and subsequent removal of myself from the military basically, argues that it could be discrimination. Lastly, and this is the important part, at the second interview, he stated on 2 occasions that he would provide classified or sensitive information to Israel if they asked for it, but then ultimately let them know after he did. That's ridiculous. That is why he lost his clearance, not because he's a Jew, not because he's Israeli, but because he made it clear that if the situation arose, he would side with Israel's military and give them classified information, even if they didn't want that. And yet you will see a long string of Zionists trying to make this out to be racist against Jewish people, even though I argue it wouldn't matter in any the point is this is just an obvious issue, as he himself describes that there is a dual loyalty issue here, that Zionism clearly manufactures. But I would still argue that if you put all of that aside, whether it was any other dynamic, and he said this, it would still be revoked. And you know that. That is really important. And it shows you a change in the Overton window and how this is all flipping around. Now, back to what I was saying earlier, I'm sure there was someone in the comments, somebody else trying to claim we're racist for the racist trope of dual loyalty. It's not a trope, and it applies everywhere you look. It's you trying to make it into something that turns everything against that. But again, that's actually how Zionism works. Here, as Blakely points out, is something absolutely incredible. This is Bill Maher taking issue with dual loyalty in the government, but for Palestinians.
You know, I mean,
and the clip is very low, by the way. So just do your best. I won't chime in. You can turn up the volume. Here it is.
Just, you know, I mean, it's one thing to be have interest in another country. It's another thing to sort of be the Palestinian representative in the Congress as opposed to representing Michigan.
Yeah, well, maybe she feels an obligation, a moral obligation, the best way that she can represent her values is to be this one voice.
But she's in the American government.
Right, there's 434 other members of the House.
So one should be from Palestine?
I'm not saying one should be from Palestine. I'm saying
that's what it seems like.
Important debate.
Wow.
That's what it seems like what it is. She's obviously representing her constituents. She has a lot of Palestinian constituents, but also feeling like that is a role that she can play in an important debate. That she is not just a member of Congress for one district, but she is representing a point of view that she doesn't feel like is often represented. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Even when, by the way, I have been extremely critical of what she has said. But
wow. The guy did a great job, by the way. I don't even know who he is, but like, you know, making a rational, balanced argument back. But I mean, it doesn't even realistically, the idea that you could make an argument, first of all, I should say actually first, the point he made, it's obvious there is a very clear Palestinian representation there. So the fact that he would argue that is not what she should represent, even though there's like, it just shows you that they don't even believe in the fake democracy they pretend they do, right? The idea is that if you got elected in a place where there is a large grouping of Palestinians, well, then that would be part of what you're supposed to represent. That's how it's supposed to work. But we all know that's not really how it works. Nonetheless, I don't support any of these people. Just as a rule, I think politicians are inherently dishonest, especially in this government. And I've pointed it out in all of these people in the what do they call them, the crew, or what do they call them, the squad. Again, they're all very partisan, and all of them. But nonetheless, the main point. Think about how insane it is for this man to make an issue about dual loyalty to Palestine for one person. Well, you cannot bat an eye. You can't throw a stone without hitting somebody who is aggressively pro-Israel to the point to where they act in the interest of Israel over America, especially today. That's left and right. He knows that. But I think that's why he's making this point. I think it's lazy. But that's where we are. Now, going forward to the next point that extends in the same way, here's Insurrection Barbie. I just don't even know where these people come from. 1 million followers, but clearly has an agenda, has the same talking points. And she says, once again, LOL, here are the top 10 foreign countries lobbying in America. I'm sure you know where this is going. Look at that. China, number one, $446 million, And it goes down in decreasing all the way down to number 10 for Israel, $188 million. No joke. First, this is just many people pointed out. I think this, this is what's his name, Schaefer. He just says, ma'am, you might want to delete this. You're missing so many lobbying financial positions, which she is, that you're off on Israel by hundreds of millions of dollars. Just in this last election cycle alone, he says. AIPAC, on top of that, isn't even registered under FARA, so there's the second point of contention. The point is that you do not have the full picture. And whether she cares about that or not, I don't think is the point. I think the point is to go, look, it's not Israel. That's all this is about. Doesn't say that, but why else make this point right now? And the reality is, and this is how the person responds, A in AIPAC means American. So that's why it's not Israel. Oh, they wrote America. So I guess that's easy. Then we know. The willful ignorance of people is crazy. I mean, let's not forget that one of the main reasons people discuss whether Israel killed JFK was this exact point, and forcing them to register under FARA, which they then didn't have to because of that. On top of the fact of the nuclear dynamic or many other points. But this was a huge one, as he was just about to force them to register as a foreign agent, and then it didn't happen. But you can decide for yourself, which I've included that in the show notes today. But that's the main point overall, is that right? The idea that you don't even touch. I mean, look, here's what I just looking this up on Brave, and you've seen us cover this. Just under Brave says, as of 2024 alone, AIPAC by itself spent over $100 million just in the 2024 election cycle. Not the whole year, which we know there's more lobbying, just in what we can prove. 2024 election cycle by itself was $100 million. That's not getting into people like Miriam Adelson, who's now spent about $200 million. But that's, of course, that's not counted because that's not the same, but it is though. It is the same thing. The main point though, is even on the record, AIPAC spent $100 million alone just on the election cycle, but we're to believe that from the entire year, from that point, they spent only $88 million for the rest of the entire year from all Israel lobbying groups, not just AIPAC. That's absolute BS. This is how they deceive you for very clear agendas. Now, whether she's even aware of the fact that she's deceiving for Israel or not is relevant. The structure built around her clearly is, and I think that's why it's happening. But Julian responds to this. Conradison, that's an interesting last name. Conradison. It says, not clear where the data came from, but it's way off. I'm sure this just got gleaned from some other post that she saw on Elon's screenshots or something like that. And it says, for starters, the Israel lobby spent well over what I was just highlighting, $100 million just in the election cycle. The low number could have something to do with AIPAC's not having to register as a foreign agent, or you just not counting the Jewish billionaires that pump hundreds of billions of dollars into elections on behalf of the Israeli lobby. Miriam Adelson, as we pointed out, $100 million to Trump, and it's gone up from that. That's the original cited number. And the Adelson spent another $172 million in 2020, which doesn't apply to this current cycle, but it matters, on all rhino Republicans that stabbed Trump in the back. But it says, and now we are supposed to believe $100 million for Miriam Adelson is an American agenda just because it's technically not from Israel lobby. But even though I disagree with that, they clearly are intertwined with that same structure. But it says, same point. But what they spent alone accounted for more than $188 million. So it's a flimsy claim. Now, I figure we play this clip again for those that might not have seen it. But I just think it's interesting because of how it's even corporate media. And it just shows you how much the perception has changed. I mean, here's even AIPAC before, this is 2022, but saying 97% of AIPAC-backed candidates won their election. That was in the midterms, but this 97%, that's bipartisan. That's almost everybody. So here's what even MSNBC had to say about the election cycle dynamic.
American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It was incorporated in 1963. For 10 years prior to that, it was known as the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs.
Now, by the way, that's the point we always get into, and you could easily prove that that was directly an Israeli group. It's not an American group. It's an Israeli government entity that just changed its name because right at that moment, they were being accused of being a foreign agent by JFK. He got killed, and that went away. And then they just changed their name and then pretended it was an American group. It's literally on Wikipedia, for crying out loud. It's just amazing the amount of the information you can see if you just care to look. But that point being said, so it's an Israeli group that is funneling money to politicians. That's why they should register.
AIPAC calls itself America's pro-Israel lobby, and according to its website, it has over 3 million members across the country in regional chapters working to, quote, expand and strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, end quote. You may know AIPAC as being one of the biggest and most recognizable donors to many of the members of Congress in your state. But contributing to campaigns is a relatively new function of the organization. Before 2021, AIPAC did not endorse candidates nor give political contributions. Its focus was on lobbying elected officials, not actually electing officials. But in a dramatic shift in policy, AIPAC began directly funding candidates and spending big on races in 2021. AIPAC Political Action Committee, AIPAC PAC.
Now, just think about why the shift, right? Post Biden, right? So you're getting close to midterms. Why? I mean, you have to at least look at the trail, right? So they start rapidly changing their structure. They start rapidly funding basically everybody and trying to directly do so, which is a huge change for anybody. Why would they start doing that? Look at what we now see. Can we not at least ask whether this was a massive coup from a foreign country to literally buy off our entire power structure and in a way that like pushed it finally over the edge? And now we're seeing this plan executed. It's just a thought. And I do think the evidence is very strong on that side, but can we not at least ask whether that's what we're seeing? I keep pointing this out from the very group that would, people would they would sneeze too hard and you would scream coup, you know, false flag, and I understand why that reaction was there because it's pretty prevalent if you know what you're looking at. And now, same, just like last time, I guess you feel like you won all of a sudden and the guard gets let down. And now you have transparent examples that you would have otherwise jumped at. Just ask the question. I think it's clear.
Filed something called a statement of organization with the FEC just in time for the 2022 election cycle, where it spent $50 million, including both direct contributions to candidates and outside spending like TV advertisements. According to AIPAC, it donated money to 365 candidates from both parties, including every single member of both Democratic and Republican leadership in Congress.
Every single member of leadership. Now, you realize the only reason they're allowed to broadcast public advertisements on American TV is because they pretend to be an American group. Can you imagine China broadcasting their advertisements about politicians that they want to win in the elections? That sounds crazy, right? And you'd be like, there's no way we can allow that. Israel does it every day.
109 Republicans who voted against the certification of the 2020 presidential election in America received campaign contributions from AIPAC. All in all, AIPAC gave money to 342 members of the 118th Congress. The 2022 elections were the most expensive midterms in American history, with a total cost of $8.9 billion spent. Now, last year, AIPAC ranked 15th in total expenditure by a political action committee, according to data collected by Open Secrets. But take a look at the other funders that AIPAC is competing against for that title. Act Blue and Win Red. They are Democratic and Republican Party machines. Save America is Donald Trump's money-raising operation. The Conservative Club for Growth, Emily's List, focuses on electing Democratic women to office. All of the PACs on this list are massively domestic-focused ideological machines. AIPAC is the only organization in the top 20 whose interests are focused entirely on America's relationship to a foreign government. Now, let's take a look at who benefits from AIPAC's largesse. Here are the top 20 recipients in Congress, the House and the Senate, of AIPAC money in the 2022 midterm cycle, according to Open Secrets. They're members of both parties. They come from every corner of the country with varying levels of experience in Congress. The Democrat Glenn Ivey of Maryland tops the list. He beat out fellow Democrat Donna Edwards in Maryland's House primary after AIPAC poured millions into pro-Ivey advertisements and mailers. Edwards was running for a second stint in Congress after serving during the Obama administration, where she voted present, not even a no, on a number of pro-Israel resolutions. So the money poured in against her. Not even an endorsement from Nancy Pelosi could save her. Michigan Democrat Haley Stevens unseated Democratic Representative Andy Levin. Here's what Levin had to say about that.
I'm really Jewish, but AIPAC can't stand the idea that I am the clearest, strongest Jewish voice in Congress.
Now, here's a perfect example of what we talked about. A Jewish person who is challenged by Israel because he does not believe in their Zionist cause. All right, so it's not about being Jewish. It's about whether you believe in Zionism.
Standing for a simple proposition that there's no way to have a secure democratic homeland for the Jewish people unless we achieve the political and human rights of the Palestinian people.
Right.
AIPAC spent $4 million against Levin. He lost by 20 points.
So think about that. One candidate for one seat, $4 million. And we're going to pretend like it's that the amount they're showing, it's deliberately dishonest for this exact reason, because I think they're trying to cover up the reality that this has already happened.
When Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, was censured by the House in early November over what some lawmakers called her rhetoric around the Israeli-Hamas war, 22 Democrats joined Republicans in that censure vote.
Quick point, at least in the chat, someone saying that Levin is a Zionist, she's a liberal one. Now, that's a fair point, but I guess to make it more of a clear distinction, I would argue that if the Zionist mentality right now is about destroying the Palestinians for the objective, right? So maybe you argue that there's a split in the Zionist perspective, and maybe that's fair. That's worth discussing. I'm simply arguing that the objective. So you have the Zionist leadership that would then argue whether he calls himself a Zionist, that he wouldn't be if they're challenging that agenda. That's just my opinion. Who knows what they're actually saying? But it's a fair point to make. To make it more specific, it's about the agenda playing out that the Zionists are carrying out, and he doesn't seem to be involved in line with that, whether he believes he's Zionist or not.
18 of those Democrats received early November over what some lawmakers called her rhetoric around the Israeli-Hamas war. 22 Democrats joined Republicans in that censure vote. 18 of those Democrats received campaign funds from AIPAC in 2022, totaling more than $1.1 million. By the way, for these 6 of them, AIPAC was their top contributor. A growing list of progressive lawmakers who are vocal in their criticism of the government of Israel and its policies and their support for Palestinian self-determination have inspired AIPAC to spend even more. As progressive lawmakers began calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, Slate reported that insiders expect AIPAC's 2024 spending to hit $100 million. In fact, United Democracy Project, which is a pro-Israel super PAC affiliated with AIPAC, is already spending money on attack ads against Democratic Representatives Jamal Bowman of New York and Summer Lee of Pennsylvania. Lee has already got a primary challenger, as do Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar. Pro-Israel donors have already signaled that they're eager to primary Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
So if they spent over $100 million just on the 2024 election cycle, how much did they spend on the midterms, which was also in 2020? That would have been 2022. I'm trying to think what else would have been in 2024. Anyways, the point is the same. If you just literally stand back and look at all the information about who, and it's not just AIPAC, guys. There's a ton of Israeli lobbying groups that spend a lot of money. Again, it's the same point. It really needs to be clear that if people are out there deliberately misrepresenting the amount of money coming from what they want you to think is an American group, like, why would that be?
Congresswoman Lee already overcame AIPAC's financial influence against her once. She tweeted criticisms of Israel's treatment of Palestinians in 2021, but as a candidate, she affirmed Israel's right to exist. But that's not good enough.
Right.
AIPAC spent nearly $3 million in the primary alone to defeat Lee, and they almost did. She beat Stephen Irwin, who is third on the list of money given to candidates by AIPAC in 2022, by less than 1,000 votes. And if Congresswoman Lee wants to keep her seat in 2024, she's going to have to do it all over again. She joins me.
Well, here's a clip you've all seen, I'm sure, which is just the idea, especially for the Republican conversation, that everybody's got an AIPAC guy.
Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person," and it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
Good question.
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country?
There you go.
It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
Right. Exactly. Very clear. Now, I would argue it's probably exactly the same on the Democrat side. The only thing I might argue would be there might be a slight deviation in different, just because you could argue that there's, look, it only because of the current overwhelming support that the Republican side is showing for Israel, that it seems that, I honestly, from my general perspective, I think that that everybody in power would have somebody like that if that was what Israel wanted, or if that, if it was allowed to be that way. And I do think that's the case. If you just, and again, just look at, explain the game of Biden's administration in action, doing all the same things, but just kind of floating a slight different narrative. That's all it really comes down to. It's about keeping you thinking there's difference when all of them still fund and support all the same things. Here's the Freddie Pontone's clip for that, in case you wanted to keep that as well. I'll have me put this in the show notes for you. 97%, they said. This is the midterms again. It says, we've just helped defeat 12 candidates who work to undermine U.S.-Israel relationship. That's all they care about? Right? Who cares if the constituents in those local areas want those people because they care about what they want? No. AIPAC is able to influence what can happen because you don't agree with their perspective on how you should relate with Israel. That's crazy. And even on the surface, that's crazy. What about the local people in these local areas? Don't they get to dictate? Nope. AIPAC decides. Being pro-Israel is good, both policy and politics, they say. My God, that's so crazy. Now, Elon Musk comes out with this, and this is one of the points I was also referencing. Like, we just talked about this screenshot. It's so crazy to me how this happens. Now, I'm willing to bet you, especially since this comes from the Doge mod, whatever that means. There's like a Doge aspect of Twitter now where they have like a mod rules. It's very weird. But that this comes from him, apparently his sheet on his computer. Now, my point is not that for all I know, these numbers are accurate. I don't know, though. That's the point, because there's no source material and I have no way to reference this stuff. So he shares this thing on February 21st. This is, are you ready to have your mind blown? USAID is given a total of, wait for it, $164 million, basically $165 million to linked terrorist organizations. But dude, take the time to look at these. Now, I'm not going to say I know for sure, but I could say, what do you think a linked terrorist organization means? That means whatever they want it to mean. That they say, well, they work for this group that is part of some Palestinian thing, so terrorists. That's what they're doing. Now, you go through and look at these, you'll see for yourself. One, for example, is the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. All right, here's what at least, Brave says. It is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization established in 1991, on and on and on. Now, I'm not going to say I know one way or the other for sure, because I don't. But they argue there's no evidence which matters to provide in the context that links this to a terrorist organization. Okay. So what are they doing? I already argued last time. They're simply pointing out anything that's Islamic, that's Muslim, because that's just, and it's gross, guys, or Palestinian. And they gave them money, which, again, I don't agree with it. I don't think any money right now should be leaving it's a whole different conversation, but I don't think the money should be going for foreign funding of anything, especially Israel, while we are $36 trillion in debt. Very logical. But if you just recognize what they're pointing at while they're funding all other things anyway that aren't just some buzzword word they want you to reach, it's just gross. And it shows you that they're deliberately trying to misinform everybody. But my point is, he just says, this person posts a screenshot. So anybody honest would go, well, that's what he's claiming. I can't verify that, right? But that's not what you're going to get. Well, first, because Elon tags it, it says, as many people have said, why pay terrorist organizations in certain countries to hate us when they're perfectly willing to do it for free? Not saying true or not true, or I agree, just saying something and pointing to it, which then allows everyone to blindly take it at face value. Now, Palestinian community rightly points out, like I did for the last person I saw share this, and it says, well, since World War II, Israel's received more than $250 billion in just military aid. Ton more for just others as well. Every year, a minimum of $3.8 billion gets sent to Israel. Now, Trump extended that from Obama. That continued that very same agreement and actually increased the amount. You talked about it at the time. Last year, the figure was $22 billion. $22 billion to Israel in 1 year. And we're talking about what? 164 million to a combined 17, 18, 20 different agencies that are not necessarily linked to terrorists because they point to a screenshot. That's wild. Now, what you'll notice here, how many of these absolute partisan, mindless followers regurgitated the post? Wall Street Mav, 1.6 million followers. I mean, this one itself, Elon, 16.5 million. This guy's post from Doge, 16.5 million also. Funny how that works. Doubled it out. Wall Street Mav got another 106,000 views. And they don't share any source material. It's a screenshot. And this one's actually a screenshot of a screenshot. And then just goes, I'm speechless. Yeah, I'm speechless too. How ridiculous you guys are. How you didn't, no one's checking any of this. Now, hear me. I'm not saying I know for sure that's not accurate. My point is, neither do you. Nobody does, because nobody shared any source material as far back as you want to look. But you'll find a ton. My point is, they just see this, say, Doge mod. They take it at face value. Would you do that if it was a Democrat? You shouldn't do it either way. You shouldn't take any government person at face value. We all used to agree with that. But you look, many huge accounts sharing screenshots of screenshots. You'll not find the source material. I think even if it turns out to be true, same point. That's not, it shows you these people are parrots, right? I mean, guys, what we're looking at is one big two-party illusion nonsense where they're all just parroting whatever, they're just a bunch of Redemplicans all saying the same damn thing. They're all one big blob of nonsense. And here they are just sharing what their person said. It's everywhere. But look for yourself. It goes on forever. And again, whether most of those groups, you can literally look up for yourself and find that they're just connected to something Muslim or something Palestinian, and they just go terrorist groups because that's easy and lazy and disgusting. Dr. Simon Godek, going back to the Epstein list, points out another illusion of all of this. And again, I'm not going to be the one that said, they said day one, what's not done, so fail, even though that technically is a promise that was not kept. Day one, we'll do this, and they didn't do it. Even though same people would scream about Biden not doing it, the same back and forth nonsense. The point is, highly unlikely these things are going to happen the first day, again, which we were yelled at for saying that at the time. Now the point is, well, the Epstein list should have been released based on what we were told, right? But they're acting like there's some ongoing thing. And okay, well, ask yourself, if we're to believe what Republicans are saying, which it's just Democrats, right? Biden and bad guy, why would you need to do anything? Right? Just release it. Isn't that what it's all transparency and the truth, we're told, right? You're fighting the deep state. Release the list. What is the issue? The only thing you can logically discern from this is that means there's something on that list, if it even exists in front of them right now, that they don't want you to see. Whether that's an ally of theirs, whether that's somebody in the current government, whether it's Trump himself. I think that's ridiculously self-evident. But the point is, Simon Godek says the Epstein list should have been released yesterday. They posted this on the 25th. So it was yesterday. They posted today, meant yesterday. That's so confusing the way I said that. He said this today, referencing that it should have been released yesterday. Now he says every single delay only fuels more speculation. If there's nothing to hide, why the secrecy? The people deserve to know. Until then, here are just a few totally unthinkable rumors that will keep spreading. One, the delay is because the list includes U.S. presidents, top intelligence officials, and key media moguls, which I can guarantee it does. The entire system would crumble overnight. Hooray. Number two, blackmail operations are still active. Powerful figures aren't being exposed because they're still paying for silence or being forced to play along. Also, I think simultaneously active. That's Israel for you. And if you're not seeing that by now, you're not looking. Number three, some names are being erased before publication. Again, I think probably all of these simultaneously. The delay is just a cleanup operation, ensuring that only expendable people take the fall while the real power players stay in touch. Now, look, if you can't, again, same as all of these points, if you can't stand back and go, that's very possible, or at least just possible, you're lying to yourself. My point is that when the list comes out, if it does, why would we assume we know for sure that that represents the full list? It's not going to be in some format that allows us to be able to see that it's like the original document. That's not how it's going to work. Whatever that would even mean, how can we even prove that? It's going to be a list they put out on something and they claim that's all and the people that want to believe it will buy it. And you know what, for me, my perspective, maybe it is the full list. I don't know. And that's the only honest way to engage with it. But at this point in time, all of these things make sense with the reality that they've waited for some unknown reason. I mean, I could also be objective and say maybe there is a reason that is, national security or something that we would agree with that they just can't say out loud. Certainly possible. Unlikely with everything we see right now, but, possibilities do exist. A massive distraction is coming. Number 4, whether it's war, a financial collapse, or another crisis, something is going to be used to make sure we forget about all this. Now, that is what almost always seems to happen. It says, but this is not a conspiracy theory. It's common sense. Just considering the possibilities, not saying we know for sure one of them will happen, but these are all possible. The longer they stall, the worse it looks. So, Sally Agris points out today, and this is not to say, this is kind of him being like kind of satirical, or rather just kind of snide, but the point is, and I agree with him, not that they're doing this, but this is what you can discern from it not happening, or at least the way to frame it so you get Trump people to see it this way. He says, so if Trump ordered the Epstein list to be released, which is what they're claiming he did, right? And the AG he hired refuses to comply, which again, that's not what they see it as, but isn't that what's happening? Why are we waiting? He ordered it day one, right? Release those January 6 people. He said it out loud. Do it. Funny how they apply that urgency one way and not the other. But it goes on to say, why does she still have a job? Right? So if she hasn't released it, even though he said to today, then why is she done? You get the point. Interesting way to think about it, but it won't be applied that way. There'll be a assumed benefit of the doubt for why it's taking that long because she's on our side. But there's I think so that we'll list a few of them that are like involved in this process. This is one of them, Representative Anna Polina Luna. Again, all these people are, and we went over it already, like blatantly over the top pro-Israel, Zionist, absolutely clear about that. She says, all the secrets the deep state has kept from the American people will be revealed. This is what President Trump ordered, and this is what the American people receive. Age of meme politics. What does this have to do with anything? Why are you even posting this? It's nothing. It's meaningless. You're saying things they're not doing something today. So you just stood up and said, the things will happen that you want. We're on your team. The American people asked, they got what they wanted. It's like, okay, it's a politician just placating you. Maybe you believe her. My point is that this is just a statement. There's no need for this other than to keep you feeling like you're winning. Even if you actually are, understand. It still is the same point. Just to they want you to remember that we're doing it and we're on the same side, but there's no action. That's the 22nd. Nancy Mace comes up with the 24th and says, what do you want the Declassification and Transparency Task Force to expose first? Epstein, JFK, UAPs? 85% vote Epstein list. It's just okay. Just release all 3 of them. What is the issue here unless you're covering something up? There's always the deferential kind of mindset to be like, well, they need to give the benefit of the doubt because they're trying to make sure. No, that is you giving them the mindset that they're doing the right thing. You don't know that. I want actual transparency. I want to see the whole damn thing, and I'll decide what's important for American people or for myself from that perspective. Jim, the Patriot, simply points out that what a tangled web we weave and shows all of them involved. Here's Anna, $36,000 from AIPAC. Here's Nancy Mates, $153,000 from AIPAC. Here's Tim Burchett, $23,000 from AIPAC. Here's Brandon Gill, $25,000. Here's Eric Burleson, $14,000. And here's Lauren Bobbitt, $23,000. The point is, you could argue that's just money they took because they're politicians, which in and of itself I think is crazy. But at the very least, if you're objective, that's money they took from somebody who has an interest in this outcome. It has to, that is the textbook example of a conflict of interest. She follows up on the same day. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There's more from her. This is the same post, and this is another response. The Texas One responds, release the files. We don't need or want the theatrics. These are Republicans, guys. That's what I'm always trying to show you. A lot of people are just not buying the shtick right now. And that same post, Truth Stream Media responds and says, treating the American people like children and your task force like a poorly written episodic TV show isn't going to build or regain trust. Just so you know. This is my point, guys. People are not buying it. Now, here is Representative Anna Polina Luna on the 24th saying, my GOP Oversight Task Force first hearing will be held on March 26th and will examine the assassination of President JFK. We will also visit the site of the assassination in Dallas, Texas, and speak with firsthand witnesses. Okay. Do it. You see, I'm just so exhausted with this. It's just all talking points and memes. Do it. Do something. Stop. And this 3 million views, and people share this and go, see, we're literally pointing at this as if this is something other than just placation. And so you're going to go to Texas, like realize most dynamics around the JFK assassination are long past being, like most people are dead. I frankly think a lot of this is just about putting on a show. And the obvious point we already made is about whether any of these people will reveal the fact that Israel killed JFK, which I think the evidence is pretty shockingly obvious. And it seems to be, as Corey Hughes points out, in conjunction with the CIA. My point is these people are Zionists working for the U.S. government that are very unlikely to reveal that they were involved with that. But here she is on the same day, 24th. Right? So this is my point. This is propaganda. She puts this out on 8:30 on the 24th. We're doing this and we're working on that. And then she just decides to follow up, and a couple hours later, release the Epstein files. Okay, who are you talking to? That's what we're saying to you. What, you're just going to yell that out with an exclamation mark? We're going to go, yay, she said it. We're on the same team. They think you're they literally treat you like your children. Here she is a few hours later. Pam Bondi, we saw over the weekend you were reviewing all files from JFK to Epstein. We are all anticipating their release. When will they be declassified and available to the public? See, you don't need to put that on Twitter. She can call her. They're probably in the same effing room. To me, that is about giving you the show. Look, we're talking, and I'm calling for it to be, we're on the same. I don't need to keep fleshing out the point, guys. It's transparent to anybody who cares to see it. It's a show. James Lee says, what kind of Mickey Mouse operation are you running here? Right? Exactly. Now, Elon Musk, on the 24th, quotes what Liz Churchill said. One of the other, kind of in the midders. Anyway, says, wow, Senator Marsha Blackburn asks. So the story is Blackburn says things. Ask Kash Patel to release unredacted files. So the same game. Okay, so was the assumption it was going to be redacted? Then why? That's not what they claim. They said full transparency. But so now you're calling up and saying, do the thing that you already said you would do. And then says, after claiming Democrats blocked her from doing it for years. Oh, okay, so you didn't release the information that you had access to because they blocked you? What does that even mean? Release it. Be a whistleblower. Do the right thing. So you're basically admitting the fact that you've always known the reality and you've never told anybody till now, and you haven't released it till now. And now you're just going, do it because they haven't let me. Am I the only one that finds this like childishly stupid? Like, this is ridiculous. And she goes, wow. It's like, what? Nothing's happened yet. And Elon Musk goes, yes. His little bot response he does and just goes, gives that millions of reach because, I don't know, we want the narrative to keep going. 11 million views. Dr. Simon Godek says, hey, Pam Bondi, which names on the Epstein client list are so explosive that they're causing this delay? If there's nothing to hide, there's no excuse for dragging this out. The longer you stall, the more obvious it becomes. Drop the list now. Representative Anna Paulina Luna. This is where it gets even more interesting. Points to the fact that the FBI is deleting everything right now. Who didn't see this coming? Now, understand what we're talking about here. We're not coming up to Trump's overlap here. We're well into Trump's administration. Now, yes, they're still going over confirmations, but if you're to believe that they just allowed, look at, again, there's no one action that solves everything, as much as they want to pretend that in certain cases, whatever partisan we're talking about from either side. So I'm the first to admit that it's not as simple as just going, done, right? But in other contexts, we step in and we act like he's just able to mix and change and do everything. Now we're in Trump's administration. We're months into it, right? So we're to believe that the FBI has just been allowed to just continue to do whatever it's been doing. Like if they're seizing into the IRS and taking all the data, why wouldn't they do that? I'm not even saying it should, or I want that, or that it even makes sense, or it's even possible. My point is that it's interesting that we're going to argue right now, as I'll read it to you in a second, that this was something they set out to do from the beginning. So Trump was saying, we're going to do this, knowing that the FBI would be involved. And then you step in and then you don't do anything to secure the information that you think based on your narrative that they'll do something to stop. Maybe that's because it was always supposed to go this way. Maybe because Trump's list is on that name. List, that's funny. Trump's name is on a list. But she goes, well, first, Benny Johnson shares this. And this is what I find, this is the meme culture, right? Benny Johnson, A mainstream alternative media person comes out and says, or interviews a guy that Alex Jones was just pointing to and saying, FBI whistleblower reveals the FBI is actively destroying files. How does he know that? As far as I can tell, this guy's not an active member of the FBI. At the same point, at least consider the possibility this guy is simply saying this because it suits an agenda. Now, or he's telling the truth. The point is, neither you or I know that. He's saying things, consider it. Okay? But who benefits is always the first step. Not the only step, but always the first step. Who benefits? I think that's transparent right now. Israel, the United States government that's involved, or people in Congress that are involved who don't want the information to be leaked out, who now get to go, well, they just destroyed it before we could. Is there only one piece of data? Is there not a secondary point? I mean, there's so many things to point out. But he says the FBI is working day and night to destroy these files, day and night. We're doing paper shredding now, apparently. We're back in the 90s. It says can't be restored. I'm sure there's info about Epstein and subversion against the Americans. I'm sure. Here's what's so stupid about this. Paulina Luna, not because they reached out to her, not because the whistleblowers are speaking to Congress or people in the government, but because the guy spoke to Benny Johnson. He posted on Twitter and she goes, oh, following up. Okay, so now you found out through Twitter and you're just looking into it because there's a tweet? And it says, Kash Patel will discover exactly who destroyed these documents. So now it's happened before we even look into it. So you're following up, but now you know they've been destroyed. So you're taking what he says at face value without investigation? Yes. Doesn't that show you something? It shows me this is a theater show. That you're just building on the narrative, like the meme culture we already saw. It becomes a joke, then Elon shares it, then Trump captions it, then all of a sudden it becomes what we're doing because they like it. To me, the timing even, right? The timing even from looking at how it's the same moment, like it's hours. And we're talking about the idea that you're following up immediately and going back and saying, we'll discover who did the thing he just pointed to. I'd love to see evidence of any of the things they claim are happening. I'm not even saying it seems likely that would happen. To me, if this ends up where they say the Democrats, even though we're talking about Trump's current administration, destroyed this through the FBI before we could get to it, are you going to buy that? Obviously, it's possible, but are you just going to blindly take it at face value? I'd like to believe most conservatives or Democrats would probably go, I don't know about that. But you know the team sport Republicans are going to go, absolutely, 100%, before approving anything. Here's our interview with Corey Hughes, if you'd like to check it out. I think it's important. The evidence is pretty hard to deny. Now, we just talked about this in regard to the deep state, the globalism, the reality of it, the New World Order. This was on the 8th of January. As Israel's globalist ambitions become clear, transparent, realize, there are multiple fronts, taking Lebanese territory, taking Syria, right? They've already occupied all of Palestine. It's just encroaching everywhere you look, even Egypt. That's obvious. You have the U.S. doing the same thing. You have them working together it's obvious to me. But as their globalist ambitions become clear, Team Sport Republicans endorse the North American Union. That was on about the very clear map you can see here at the UN, showing you the outline for what they're now accomplishing through a different agenda. Worth considering what the deep state, globalist, Zionist, technocratic agenda, the groupings behind it actually are. Not just the Democrats. It's really all of it. But of course, it's not Israel, right? Can't be, because Elon Musk said so. Mark Levin, very blind Israel supporter, says he points this video out about the trial. Netanyahu, basically, criminal that the entirety of Israel calls out as a criminal. It's hilariously obvious. But he goes, the legal war against Netanyahu. Yeah, because he committed a lot of crimes, and they all know that. Even Miriam Adelson is on a leaked video claiming that if she had spoken out, that Netanyahu would have had her killed. It's just crazy. These people know they're lying, guys. And so too does Elon Musk. He responds and says, the deep state is everywhere. But you see, this is what I keep pointing out. Did he just explicitly say that the deep state's going after Netanyahu? No. He highlights this tweet and just shares a statement that you could decide applies to this or not. The deep state is everywhere. Right? So eventually, if he tries to pretend he didn't mean that, he goes, I just said that they are everywhere. Always how this works. But you know what he's trying to imply. He wants you to believe that the deep state is fighting Netanyahu. It's just crazy how obvious this is. So the obvious and one of the most immersed aspects of what the deep state, globalist, technocratic agenda Israel, a very clear part, the U.S. and what they're doing through the technocratic kind of Silicon Valley, I mean, all the stuff we've seen is very clear to me, as they do all the things we're talking about. But if he just says, well, the deep state going after Netanyahu, therefore they're not. But they are, though. And it's very, very obvious. And that's the point about what we see playing out. But as long as they keep sharing memes like this, and wokeness says the deep state will not go down without a fight, buckle up. You see, what's the point of that? You're just simply keeping people going. You got your followers, they're just waiting for the new thing. Yay, rah! Keep pushing because the deep state. So keep doing what? Whatever they tell you to do. Whatever they just did, keep doing that because that's what they're doing. Oh, is it? And Elon just shares this, cracks knuckles. It's just a theater show, guys. It's sad. And it's sad that anybody falls for this stuff. But Israel is one of the most, if not the most transparent enemy, problem, villain in the world right now. Everyone in the world sees it. That does not mean every Israeli or every Jewish person. In many cases, not even close. The reality is that the Israeli government and the Zionist structure that's infiltrated all sorts of governments around the world is a very transparent problem that anybody with morals, integrity of eyes can see. That's why it's so concerning that have basically the entire power structure, both sides of it, blindly in line with that. But as we just talked about earlier, Robert followed up with a great report about the Tel Aviv bus bombings. Very objective. Basically outlines the different possibilities, shows you the evidence that makes us believe that it's probably a false flag, but doesn't necessarily say we know that for sure. It's worth reading. It's a great overview. And I frankly think it's pretty transparent, especially since at the very least, a never let a good crisis go to waste kind of point, where whoever's responsible, without even knowing, they're going West Bank, we're going after, and they rolled into the West Bank, even though they were already doing that, which is basically what they did. And we already knew that was going to happen because Trump's agreement was already made according to the Knesset. And the second phase part of that as well. Now, we already saw this coming, at least if you watch this show. During Biden's administration, they didn't care either. They same game, though. They feign it from a different side, but acting like they're trying to work with so what they did was basically push this in, but then didn't care. Right? So they put in a directive that basically said they weren't allowed to fund Israel if they violated the law, or the human rights laws, but that was already the law. So this was a feign move anyway. But then on top of that, didn't even care. They kept funding them anyway, despite the lie. We went over that many times. So that's the different flavor. The amount and the outcome is the same, okay? Trump steps in, removes the Biden directive, just pulls the mask off. The outcome is the same. It's just a different flavor. You see my point? But what he did is very transparently show Israel, go ahead and keep violating every law you want. We'll keep funding you. I already sent billions and billions of dollars, but it says Trump repeals Biden directive linking U.S. arms sales to human rights. There's only a few groups that relates to right now, primarily Ukraine and Israel. And that is that if they violate human rights, legally, you're not allowed to sell them weapons. That's international law too. They don't care. It's already U.S. law. They don't care. He's just simply making it clear. We don't care about human rights. We care about business dealings and power. So Israel, do what you want. We'll even remove the directive so it's transparent. There's not even a legal challenge. This is what your government is currently doing. This is Haaretz, by the way. Now, Ukraine, to go over some foreign policy points before we go finish with some other points about Israel and Gaza. If you haven't seen this, it's been developing. Again, it's funny how rapidly this changes. It started with basically the game. Well, remember the first point is that they're going to end the Ukraine war on day one. That didn't happen. Now he's going to stop the funding. That also didn't happen, despite the feigning of that, or Marjorie Taylor Greene claiming that he did. And then like the day after, they continued to fund Ukraine. I pointed out twice now, also through Israel, because they're still funding Ukraine. But then it went to, we need to stop this. There was a weird kind of spin up between Zelensky and Trump. I mean, it just got all ridiculous very rapidly. Then it became the war. We're gonna make a deal for the minerals, and most of us were like, and there you go, which is exactly one of the main points we were making from the beginning. That it wasn't about defending anything; it was about you gaining what you wanted from this at the expense of Ukrainians, like every damn thing else we're talking about. Then it became a weird moment where they said Europe offered him a deal, and Zelensky turned him down. I think that was sort of honestly, I think that was a lie. I can't even read it. It happened so quickly. My point is that it now reverted back, and Ukraine has agreed to terms of minerals, a deal for minerals with the United States. It's one of those I told you so moments, guys. Is this what Ukrainians want? The U.S. government to come in and mine everything out from underneath them at the expense of everybody there? And that's not going to benefit anybody but the globalist technocratic control structure. They need this for what they're building. It's the same anywhere else they're working in. This is one of the main points and also I think for Syria, for manipulating Russia, but this seems to be the outcome. Now you've got Israel literally building out Syria for themselves, and I guarantee this will be next. That's my opinion. As I said, let's not forget that Israel funds Ukraine and the Azov movement. And they have been. This is in 2018. Rights groups demand Israel stop arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Very public. People still act that it's confusing to them. It shouldn't be. They've been doing it their entire existence. Israel. Trump is still funding Israel, which it commits as it commits a multi-nation genocide, which he explicitly made sure to do. Then he is still funding Ukraine because Israel funds Ukraine. But after this, they went on to fund Ukraine again. Now, Ben Norton points this out. It said, this is the article from Kiev Post saying Ukraine receives Israeli anti-defense early warning systems. He says Israel supporting Ukraine in the NATO-Russian proxy war and gave it a missile warning system. It's impossible to support Palestine if you support Ukraine. Ukraine is an ally of the genocidal Israeli regime, which I've been saying for a very long time. I mean, it's public, but people just don't want to agree with it. Ukraine is the U.S. empire's Israel in Europe. Now, Clown World called this out on the 21st. It says Zelensky just caved. After hesitation, Ukraine is now set to sign a $500 billion deal. Am I the only one that keeps noticing this same weird overlap? Whether it's Apple funding this or Stargate funding for that or Ukraine giving... Very strange to me, by the way. So it's not strange if you look at how this is moving. It is one deal for another. You are watching kind of... we're being sold out. That's my opinion. Now, of course, you could argue he's doing this in the interest of the United States, but let's see how it plays out. I hope you're right. I don't think I think what you can see in every way is what they're doing is for something else at the very least, if not for none of us. But the bottom line is that seems very telling. So did he make this deal to supplant, to pay for this one and that coming from over? It's very strange. My point is we won't ultimately see how this all interconnects until we see it flesh out. But it says giving up 50% of its rare earth minerals. This comes just hours after Trump applied pressure. Remember, now, here's another way to look at it, by the way. So now all you're doing is you're signing a deal for the minerals that they've basically already been taking, and you continue to fund their war for $500 billion. Now, whatever happens with the agreement with Russia and what we see between these two will make the difference on that point, right? But if the war continues, he just funded it with $500 billion for taking from Ukraine, even though we know Zelensky, not even though, but as Zelensky is a puppet of outside forces and is not representative of Ukraine. That would be why. It says this comes just hours after Trump applied pressure. Remember when they said Trump was weak on Ukraine? Now Zelensky's scrambling to stay in good graces. America first foreign policy is back. How stupid. How in the world is that America first? I mean, there's just no way. This is typical U.S. foreign policy, left or right, guys. It is taking from foreign entities using military power at the expense of the local people, which always only blows back on us. Not us, America, us as American people, because our government doesn't care. It never stops. But as David Icke says, Clown World about sums up the spin of this highly misleading post. One of the goals of the Ukraine conflict has been to asset strip the country of its people. This is not about glove puppet Zelensky, but the people of Ukraine who see their country and future handed through glove puppet Trump to the corporate oligarchs of the global cult that owns Zelensky, Trump, Musk, Putin, Xi, Biden, Obama, and the bloody lot of them. But please enjoy the show, although, spoiler alert, in the last act, we all get shafted completely with AI while the cult steals all the cookies. Yes, you get shafted, especially MAGA, while they laugh at you. Now, here's Lindsey Graham just deciding to step up and say, hey, we need to bomb Iran, because that's seemingly like what you need to see. First of all, is these people just always with their angle. It's all military war. It's the opposite of what benefits you. But you also have to notice that every one of these agendas are in a field of war or a field of politics that are in Israel's interest. You can't miss that overlap every time, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Iran, whether it's all for there. Is there some new field where the U.S. is involved that doesn't involve Israel? No. Point it out to me. I'd love to see it. Everything they're doing is for Israel's interest, and people that are paying attention have been calling that out for a long time.
Administration is going to have to make a decision here very soon about the Iran nuclear program. There are two paths to take. A military path where we help Israel.
Israel. I think he said so stupid. He said Israel.
A military path where we help Israel deliver a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. I prefer that path. The second path is to negotiate with Iran to try to get them to abandon their nuclear ambitions. If that path is chosen, it needs to be limited in time. We should put it on the clock, and we should define what success looks like.
Oh, yeah, it was called the JCPOA, you moron, and you guys all pulled away from it because that's not actually what you want. You want the destruction or co-option or occupation of Iran for Israel. That's what's been on the play, the 7 countries, 5 years. I mean, it's transparent. So, I mean, I've gone over this so many times. I'm only including it now to point out that there's many different aspects of what they're continuing, though the peace president, as they roll out all these new fronts of war. But to highlight, again, for the 100th time, the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as the State Department, by the way, we just went over this recently, has confirmed that Iran has not been actively seeking to develop a nuclear weapon. Over and over this happens. And Netanyahu's been trying to tell you it's been going on. They're 30 seconds away for like 20 years. So, and then people like Lindsey Graham come out and breathlessly scream the same thing. And it never happens because it's not actually happening. And they have now confirmed that more than once. This is the group that goes and looks. But it doesn't matter. Now they're back at the point where Israel's like literally on the reins. So they just go right back to the same old talking points. Now in Syria, same conversation. Trump admin starts easing Syria sanctions to inclusive government. Inclusive government. You mean the Hayat al-Sham terrorists that are murdering, raping, and torturing, all of which you can see happening alongside ISIS and Israel, like objective, very clearly on the ground. They're literally persecuting religious minorities. This is the inclusive government. I mean, then it's just the narrative. And I thought the inclusive thing was what we weren't supposed to support. Now you're supporting the inclusive government. It's not, but the narrative of one in Syria. Are you a woke president now, Trump? It's just so funny. Nothing means anything. Everything means nothing. It's nonsense all the time. The point, guys, removing restrictions on the terrorist organization in Syria and the Israeli group that runs the country now. Because why not, right? Because that's freedom, right? Isn't that, we'll call it whatever we want. Syria is being overtaken by Israel. I've gone over this constantly. A Syrian girl points out in this map, this image right here, blue areas on the map are where Israel is taking, the blue is the already stolen. The yellow area are the areas that declares it will steal. As we told you, literally half of Syria. I mean, it's exactly what we told you. That is Greater Israel. On top of that, the northern part is where the U.S. is for the most part. Basically, Al-Tanf is basically where the end is on the far bottom right, and then the rest goes. I mean, it's mapped out, guys. They did this on purpose. It's transparent. Let me see if I have that image. Thought I did. I can just look it up in general on here. Just so you can see the image. I mean, the overlap is striking. Of course, it doesn't show it on here. Come on, Brave. Of all platforms, Google will show it. Not that I'm saying Google is better. I just think that's interesting. There you go. So just take a look at the map overlap. There's one that looks, I think, is easy to see. I don't see it right now. Of course not. Well, here's just, you could see the overlap. Look at that. You not see exactly the point, guys? I mean, look, it's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, they're very clearly living out their Greater Israel, and they're open about that. That's what's so incredible about this for people like me. They're literally saying that. They got patches on their military uniforms, and yet we have people in power in our media that just act like you're crazy. That is what we're talking about. How do you explain stuff like that? They announced this plan years ago, she says. FYI, many fools still don't see it coming. And yes, by blue, they indicate the entire Israel as formerly Syria. Credible. Now, in Syria in general, these are all over the place. Like with Craig Murray in Lebanon, daily showing you what's happening, and no one seems to care. Syrians are marching. They're calling. They don't agree with what's happening. There's already resistance groups rising up, which I'm sure will be called terrorists, even though this is their country. It's the same as anywhere else, guys. Peaceful demonstrations by Christians against the persecution of those being of persecutions for religious minorities in Syria. Here, Netanyahu says, we will not allow Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the group that they've allowed to be there, that they're working alongside, south of Damascus, they claim. So you're allowing them to take part. It's just so funny. It says, we will not tolerate the threat to Druze community. So all you're seeing is them using this community for a part that Israel wants to personally go in and dictate. And the point is, those Druze, just like this did last time, have stood up and protested publicly. They do not want Netanyahu. They do not want to be Israeli. They are Syrian. They always point that out. And they nonetheless use them as the justification for protect, just like the U.S. government does. We're going to protect the civilians. They go in and kill all civilians or use them however they want. Patrick Henningsen says, and this is from 2024, mind you, Israel's now actively ethnically cleansing parts of southern Syria, ordering evacuations of villages around Daraa. Settlers will gradually follow. That's already been happening. Sound familiar? They will gradually continue this incremental expansion until they connect to their allies in the Druze enclave of Sweden. Now, there are elements of it, but the majority of these people have been pushing back. Now, and this is in Sweden anyway, but it says, in some point, an autonomous Druze statelet will be proposed as an Israeli proxy. It's all going to plan. Meanwhile, the brain-dead mob still thinks the Western Israeli-backed al-Qaeda takeover is a democratic revolution. He said that in December 2024. He's not psychic, guys. It's just, anybody paying attention already saw this was going this direction. Now, Miriam Barghouti points out, Israeli army officially declares expansion of operations across the entire district of Jenin. It's in the West Bank. This is after destroying Jenin refugee camp, where Operation Iron Wall began 35 days ago. This is a full military takeover of Jenin, north of the West Bank. There's not even a narrative that makes sense of this. This has been one of the most obviously illegal parts of any conversation. This is why Jordan stood up early and said the red line is the West Bank. This is Israel showing you that they believe they have impunity, and damn it if they don't look like it. I mean, look, I know that people see this. That's the most obvious part of this. But what's terrifying, I think, to all of us is that the power structures are showing that they're either compromised, unwilling to go after Israel, or a part of their agenda. I mean, this is everywhere you look right now. Here's the Jerusalem Post. They publicly are saying things like this. They seek Israel's destruction. West Bank sovereignty is a must, as they steal it from somebody else. Asal Rod points out Western media is once again manufacturing consent, as usual, in the West Bank now, forcibly expelling people from their homes. Apparently, hundreds of thousands of people, they were publicly telling you, are gone and will never be allowed back in the West Bank. Just like that. Their return is called ethnic cleansing. Preventing their return. Ethnic cleansing. That's what Trump said. No right of return. Ethnic cleansing. They're not being evacuated. It's illegal occupation. But they're saying West Bank residents cannot return. Extended stay. Evacuated. Disgusting. Imagine them saying that about some foreign country kicking you out of Florida. Oh, they just have an extended stay over there. They're evacuated for their own benefit. Sarah points out Israel's deliberately bulldozing the streets. We saw this last time. You want to explain for me why that's happening? It's not a secret, guys. They're destroying the streets to destroy the infrastructure. They don't care if that makes it 50 times harder for them to build there later. It's about destroying Palestinian life because they've been trying to for 76 years. And now, whatever reason, the current administration and the last one are allowing it. Something has shifted, guys. And if you want to stand back and look at what I'm talking about, there's an obvious possibility here that they have now taken control. Express News. Netanyahu speaks publicly on the 23rd of a, quote, new Middle East. Funny how all these things are coming out now. And announces that he will not withdraw from 5 different points in Lebanon, nor from the buffer zone in Syria. No, we're done now. We've always been pretending like it was some other reason. Now we're just going to stay. Like we all told you was the point. He also affirms that he will not allow, as we said, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to go into Damascus, which it's long since been done. They're all over this area and they're working right alongside Syria. It says, as for Israel's Minister of Defense, Katz, he declares that they will not allow the return of people to the West Bank. The point, though, guys, is they're using the High Trail Sham excuse, like they've always done. We're fighting the terrorists to go after these terrorists. We want us to protect this group from them. They're all working for you. David Miller points out in southern Lebanon, back to Lebanon in general, less than a mile from the border of occupied Palestine, but you see all these all interconnect, the site of a colonial settlement, in sight of one, and an occupied forces base embedded in that settlement. He said he came across this, which is 1,000 feet of detonation cord with, as it says, an inline initiator written in English. It's for laying explosive charges and blowing up the homes of local people. This is very clear. Craig Murray's been covering this extensively. In the place he found this, there was ample evidence of thousands of homes destroyed by detonation. Yes, but also by bulldozer, tank, shell, and missile. As you can tell, the label is printed in English, suggesting it was supplied by the United States. Perhaps we can find out the code number from the death firm manufacturing it. This is Zionism. There's the code. The point is, this is illegal. Not supposed to be detonating homes. The game was, well, we found a Hamas tunnel or human shields and we had to blow it up. No, when they can lay this cord, that proves it's a crime because they are simply destroying infrastructure. They don't care. I mean, at this point, maybe they do have impunity, guys. I don't want to believe that, but here we are. The amount of evidence we have for what they're doing, the fact that they then go gloat about it on Twitter and then go post on Instagram where they dance as they kill children, it's scary. I'd like to believe we could do something about it. Here's Noam Chomsky from a long time ago before, a lot of things changed, but basically telling you the Hezbollah group they're claiming is a terrorist group is not. It's in fact the U.S. and Israel that are very clearly the terrorist organizations. It's true. The question is simply, do you consider Hezbollah a terrorist organization?
The United States considers Hezbollah a terrorist organization, but the term terrorism is used by the great powers simply to refer to forms of violence of which they disapprove. So the U.S. was, of course, supporting the Israeli invasions and occupation of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was instrumental in driving them out. So for that reason, they're terrorist organizations. And
that's exactly like Iraq, exactly like Syria. Soleimani, for example, as he defended the sovereignty of Syria against the illegal invader that claimed they had the right to do whatever they wanted, and then they claimed that was why he was always a terrorist, because he killed Americans when they illegally invaded a country he was partnered with. It's just everywhere you look, guys. It's really time. That old clip, like, are we the baddies? It's really time to come to terms with the reality of what our government has done in our name our entire lives. I'm always open to the possibility that this moment forward, we're different. Always open to that. They're clearly showing you that's not the case.
A reflection of the power of the imperial states, the United States and Europe, that they are able to shift the framework so that the problem appears to be Hamas's policies and not the more extreme policies of the United States and Israel.
Right.
And remember, we must remember that in their case, it's not just policies, it's not words, it's actions.
So transparent. And then to call out Jordan explicitly, Israel has instructed the military to prepare to remain in the occupied West Bank, quote, for the coming year, which, as anybody with a brain knows, is forever. I've never seen an example where Israel takes a piece of territory and then ever gives it back. Not in its entire history. Here we are. And then I call out the Hashemite kingdom because where are you at? Where are you? You said there was a red line here that they would never cross. And here we are. You seem to still be supporting Israel, at least by action. Now, Voice of Rabbis, one of the groups out there that is a Jewish organization that's constantly calling out Israel because they are clear. It says Jews united against Zionism, Jewish voices for justice, pro-Judaism. What they say is Israel is the new Nazi state of the world. Zionists are today's Nazis. You can decide what you think about it. Just understand this is a Jewish organization saying this. So if you want to call it anti-Semitic, well, that sounds kind of stupid when you're talking to a Orthodox Jewish organization. And it says Zionist Nazi soldier, Israeli soldier, took a photo with the bones of Palestinians in Gaza, the most perverted army in the world. This is what I used for one of the parts of the screen, the main shot today. Guys, this is detestable. These are bad people. Fuzzing his face out for a reason. Standing on the skull of a dead person with a bullet hole in his head. Right. And then you know what it says there? This is the translation. Terrorists from a different angle. Outstanding. Well, that's who we're dealing with, guys. That's Zionism for you. Now, here is another example of something they've done to these people. Now, we need translation, but I just want you to see it. A Palestinian hostage was tortured using chemicals. Now, these are many of the different people that have been released by Israel. There's no debate here, guys. They've come out of the Israeli torture prisons that are literally torture prisons. And this is what he looked like after he came back out. I mean, they even blurted out
اعتقالي من عمارة المعتز واحد بجانب الشؤون المدنية أخذوني بعمارة.
His left eye looks all cut and bleeding, or was bleeding.
تم الاستخدام علي مواد كيماوية.
It says I was subjected to chemical substances and chemicals were used.
الكيماوية تعود مية النار.
Fire, water, acid, chlorine, dishwashing, laundry detergents.
والصابون.
And so, air fresheners. Just anything they could do to mess with them. Guys, this has been reported by other doctors. They were ignited on my body. After the 3 days, the IOF saw that my body has reached or reacted, excuse me. He says fire, water, that says acid, and the chemical substance in general. They then took him into the occupied territories. Of course, there was also torture in the occupied territories. Yeah, of course. Including beatings, insults. So they mean Israel proper, by the way, because that is the occupied territory. Not to mention hunger, sitting in the cold. Right, so they take him there because he's suffering from extreme injury, and then they torture him more.
والقعدة في البرد فيش لبس فيش حرامات مضيت هذه الفترة تقريبا شهر ونص وأنا عند الجيش.
About a month and a half he spent like that. Now, again, to be obvious and objective, is the point is this is what he's claiming. Don't just blindly accept it at face value. The reality, though, is all of this is being documented as they literally step out of these prisons as they're released by Israel, and this is what they're dealing with. This is what despite not even getting into the mountain of evidence coming from Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, all showing you this is what they do as a matter of policy. Jonathan Cook, Israeli soldiers shoot a 10-year-old Palestinian boy on the phone to his mother, then delay his ambulance from reaching the hospital in time to save his life. He says, no big deal. It was an Israeli child. It wasn't. The point is, if it was an Israeli child, the world would be screaming about it for 3 weeks straight. It should matter regardless of what their nationality is.
10-year-old Saddam Rajab was shot 1 week into the operation when he was on the phone to his mother. In CCTV footage, the child screams in pain and struggles to move. His father, who is on crutches, finally reaches him 2 long minutes later.
We called an ambulance. It came and carried my boy. I tried to join him, and before I knew it, 20 to 30 Israeli soldiers turned up. Where they came from, I have no idea. They detained us for almost an hour.
In 2 separate journeys, the ambulances carrying Saddam to hospitals were stopped and searched by the Israeli Defense Forces. Critical time that was lost. He never regained consciousness and died in hospital 2 weeks later. The IDF say they are investigating Saddam's case.
Oh, sure. I'm sure. It makes your blood boil. The kind of impunity to, we're investigating. Ask Matt Miller how that goes. Here is Assault Rod pointing out, we went from Israel would never bomb a hospital to Israel's attacking every hospital in Gaza, collapsing the health system, detaining doctors, and torturing healthcare workers, yet people are still defending this. There's not even a narrative anymore. You realize how mainstream this has gotten? The doctors that are speaking out that have literally watched them torture, rape, and murder children, doctors. I'm not even being hyperbolic right there. This is from The Guardian. More than 160 Gazan medics held in Israeli prisons amid reports of torture. Now, the typical Zionist response is, they're all Palestinian terrorists. You realize that we're talking about not just these 160 Gazan medics. We're talking about people from UK, Doctors from the United States, doctors around the world who are not Palestinian and not Hamas, who have watched it, who have had to deal with it, who have suffered the consequences of it. The Guardian has covered this in regard to the medics, but I'll go over a bunch of points here. This is one of the most recent examples. Here's the article from the Guardian. No rules. Gaza's doctors say they were tortured, beaten, and humiliated in Israeli detention. All of which, by the way, has been publicly covered. I mean, proven by Human Rights Watch, by B'Tselem, by Amnesty, by people on the ground, by corporate media, by independent media, by even Israel stating it and explaining why it's okay. And yet here we are acting like it's not happening. Or some people anyway. Dr. Asim Abu Ajwa was in the middle of performing emergency surgery on a patient with a severe abdominal injury. I'm sure you know where that came from. At the Al-Ali Arab Hospital in central Gaza when the soldiers came for him. He said, I asked them what they were doing in the operating theater. One of the soldiers pointed at me and said, you're Dr. Asim Abu Ajwa? He said, yes, that's me. And then they began beating him in the operating room. Still with his surgeon's scrubs on, 63-year-old doctor says he was dragged from the operating room before being handcuffed, blindfolded, and stripped. He was then put in a military truck with other doctors, nurses, and medical staff and driven away from the hospital. Less than 24 hours later, he was in a detention facility in Israel, beginning what he describes as months of brutal and constant violence and abuse. Realize the point is he was released without charge. So anyone that wants to pretend like, oh, he was probably a terrorist, then tell me why he's not in prison still. Tell me why he's not charged with a crime. It's because they're doing this to doctors, and it gets worse, as they outline why. It says, during interrogations, he said he was tortured and beaten. They would throw me on the ground. One would hit me in the head while the other opened my ear and poured water inside. There was a bathroom in the interrogation room. They would take a toilet brush and tell him, we're going to brush your teeth. They tied him up, blindfolded him, and 3 or 4 of them held his face, pinned him down, and kept scrubbing. They broke his teeth with a brush. He says they have no humanity. He says, yet that by the time January ceasefire came into effect, more than 1,000 medical staff across Gaza had been killed and many hospitals bombed to rubble. Attacks when a UN Human Rights Council commission concluded amounted to war crimes. Hundreds more medical staff who had survived the airstrike and ground assaults were arrested, illegally transferred across the border, and disappeared into Israeli prisons, including dozens of doctors. It says, one of the senior interrogators had given instructions that because I was a senior consultant surgeon, that they should work hard to make sure that I lost the use of my hands and became unable to perform surgery. He says he then was handcuffed for 24 hours a day, and interrogators used planks with chains to restrain his hands for hours at a time. They said they wanted to make sure he could never return to work. None of the senior doctors interviewed say they were given an explanation for the detention. All were released without charge after months of imprisonment. It takes a special kind of depravity to not acknowledge how obvious that is. Dr. Mohammed Abu Salima, we've talked about him before, director of Al-Shifa Hospital in northern Gaza, was arrested at a checkpoint while traveling with a convoy of patients in ambulances after the Israeli army told him to evacuate the hospital. So they knew, they evacuated and then picked him up on the way down the road. Quote, when I told them my name, they pointed their weapons at me, laser sights on my head and chest, and I was immediately detained, as if they were waiting for me, as if they had seized a big prize. They beat me with rifle butts and chairs. After that, they poured sand over my head and shoved dirt in my mouth. It goes on. It's the same thing, guys. Who can support this? A doctor told The Guardian that and another platform that he witnessed sexual assaults while in Israeli detention and tried to help treat a healthcare worker who had been raped by prison guards. If you're still pretending that that's not the case, you have to realize they publicly debated that should be okay on mainstream Israeli TV. Not even to mention the B'Tselem, Israeli leading human rights group, they put out the report called Welcome to Hell. The Israeli prison system is a network of torture camps. They're specifically citing the Sid Tiemann rape case in this. You can't ignore this stuff anymore. Human Rights Watch, 2020, this is August 26, 2024, covered the same thing well before we got to the point where it was that public, and it was already happening. Palestinian healthcare workers tortured. Goes over the same conversation. Now, here's the one I referenced earlier. This is the same report. I just shared some of the doctors speaking out, and I'll include the link to my thread that I put out around this, that 40 plus doctors all telling you the same damn thing. And I'll just play the one that I wanted to reference because you got to hear what he says again. Raped to death. These are not Palestinian doctors. These are American doctors speaking in front of the Congress and being shut down in Trump's administration timeframe for speaking about Israel.
Jewish, and I've been to Gaza as part of a humanitarian.
And just to be clear, by the way, I'm only saying that for the context of the fact that it's no different. Whether Biden or Trump or left and right, this is the United States we live in, where you get shut down for saying the truth about a foreign government in the United States.
Delegation. That was about 5 years ago. I'm Jewish, and I've been to Gaza as part of a humanitarian medical delegation. That was about 5 years ago. At that time, Israel was doing the same thing it's doing now, but it was a slow genocide. Now it's full out, the gloves are off, and the mask is off.
I've told many people that our doctors have been arrested and put in jail and tortured. Israelis are excellent at torturing people. They do it all the time.
A well-known orthopedic surgeon was taken to their torture prison and was raped to death. Raped to death.
Please, just 2 minutes, please. And that's it. We're done. Be the Nobel Peace Prize winner.
It doesn't matter. None of that matters.
And we can't even speak up in our own country.
Fascism.
Say this is unusual. This is targeted, obviously.
Bombs are killing hospitals, bombing hospitals, and we can't talk about it, where the bombs are coming from. It's embarrassing. It is an absolute disgrace. You cannot do it. Even no signs. You're bringing attention to your cause. Stop demonstrating. Disperse. It's done. It ends here, or else we start giving warnings, and everyone that's involved here is arrested.
Thank you for
arrested in the United States for speaking about what Israel's doing to Gaza, from firsthand experience as doctors in a public space.
The children.
We are here in Washington, D.C. Thousands of doctors gathered in front of Congress. They are calling for the restoration of funding to UNRWA, and they are demanding the release of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia.
The point, guys, is this is constant and everywhere you look. Here is Howard Becker saying hospital workers in war zones are protected under the Geneva Convention. The BBC here describes the kidnapping of Abu Safia as holding. We are in dangerous times. Israel confirms it is holding Gaza hospital chief. It's a crime, no matter how you look at it. B'Tselem points out, leading human rights group in Israel, 2 bills that recently passed a preliminary reading in the Knesset, so their Congress, are part of a calculated assault by the government on Israel's civil society. The aim is clear. Eliminate human rights groups like B'Tselem, silence government critics, and stop us from fulfilling our mission to defend human rights. So anybody actually trying to support or fight against the crimes they're committing, Jewish or otherwise, are attacked because Zionism is what we're talking about. It says these measures are currently targeting human rights organizations, but they are part of a broader pattern of Israeli government initiatives to harm the people living here. That's the Israeli leading human rights group. The point is they know what Zionism is doing to this country. And it's not, Haaretz just wrote an article about why Israel is the least safe place in the world for Jews. That's what they're talking about. You got to start paying attention if you haven't seen this. Francesca Albanese covers this. We just recently pointed this out. A Lancet study. Here's the link to the study. According to the Lancet, in just the first year of Israel's genocidal campaign, life expectancy in Gaza went from, it basically went, I think it was 70 something to 40. It went almost half. 40.6. Right now, the lowest in the world. No other place in the world is there a lower life expectancy than people that are under the bombing campaign of Israel. And we're pretending like we don't see this genocide. When have you ever, I mean, it's unprecedented. You cut their lifespan in half. At some point, guys, if there's any justice in this world, people will be held accountable for this. Here's another interesting point. Israel has caused losses in Gaza equivalent to 15 times its pre-war economy. 15 times. The World Bank and the UN have never estimated losses from a shock this huge. Everyone in Gaza is now poor. The economy is gone. The West Bank is on the same path. Meanwhile, next door, Israel's stock exchange is booming. Here's the point that I made. This is really important to think about. If you ever wondered in the past why Palestinians have had to live in camps needing aid for decades, just look at what's happening now. The same thing happened twice before to varying degrees. So when Zionists ask why they need to give them aid, or Trump or ridiculous Tom Cotton or Rubio ask, why should we have to give them aid? Understand they know exactly why. They don't care. Just this alone. Imagine we go forward 30 years, 10 years, 5 years, a year. All of these people have nothing to support themselves with. Their houses, their resources, it's gone. So how do you think they're going to survive? They have to, somebody's got, like some of them, I'm sure will find a way to make their own. The point is, when you're living, especially trapped within this area still, when they don't want to leave, mind you, the point is, that's the thing. Israel's maintaining the destructive nature of where they live right now. Like they've already tried to rebuild more than once. And they keep bombing. The point is, the reason they've had to continue to be funded in refugee camps is because Israel's done this more than once. There's no secret to it. They have the right to return. And if Israel just allowed that to continue, at this point, they would not still be giving aid. It's because they've kept them in camps. They've kept them isolated, occupied, and destroyed and destabilized. And then they ask why they need to keep helping. It's right in front of you guys. And I think honest people can see this already. And let's reiterate the point. After all we just saw, Trump removing a hindrance on sales to people that violate human rights laws. Sure, it's starting to make a little more sense when you can look at this group flagrantly committing rights violations all over the world, and Trump wants to keep selling them weapons. Now, in the Bibas conversation, just to rapidly point some of these things out to end today, you see Dan Crenshaw pushing the lie, like all of them, claiming that Hamas killed them with their bare hands, blindly taking what Daniel Hagari said at face value, even though he's caught lying countless times, on top of the fact that all the evidence, including still the family and the father maintaining that the IDF killed them. I simply point out, for those that care, the father still maintains they were killed by IDF bombs. This person says their father's still a prisoner, and I said no. That's why it's important. He still maintains that they're responsible. This person says forensic evidence says they were beaten to death. And I've been doing recently, I said, oh, really? Well, if true, that would be relevant. Go ahead and post it below, since we all know that only a very dishonest type of person would claim to know without seeing the info for themselves. But sadly, those morons do exist. Looking forward to seeing the evidence. Blocked, he says, for spreading disinformation, anti-Semitism, conspiracy thinking, incivility, and being human garbage. It's all over the effing news, you a-hole. Just typical. Like, this is clearly, he probably felt really stupid with no response, and it was blocked, because you know as well as I, that evidence, doesn't exist, but if it has not been released, it's not there. The bottom line is, any forensic, I've asked some people that are educated on this topic. If you think 15 months later they're able to discern that kind of forensic, that's insane, guys. It's lazy, typical Israeli propaganda. But the real point is, nothing has been shown to anybody. There's not a paper out there giving you forensic evidence. This guy's stating it because Daniel Hagari said it and other idiots shared it. And he just thinks I can say it out loud because everybody else is. That's a follower. But of course, he blocked me after that. So I followed up with this other account and I said, of course you comment and block, but go ahead and still post the evidence below. Of course he didn't. But then I commented again here, and then he blocked this one too. He says, I think he said it right here. Blocked for incivility and for evading a block. Oh, so no evidence then. Got it. If anybody had the evidence to put in your face, they would have put it in your face. But typical Zionist deflection. But here's a good post. Noah Agarmani, one of the previous detainees, because she is in the IDF, described at the UN how Israeli airstrikes killed her fellow captive, Yassi Sharabi, in the United Nations, describing that the IDF bombings almost killed her. As he writes, just like it did the Bibas family. And this person even points out, it's still on the Israeli website, claiming that this person was killed by Hamas, even though we know as a matter of fact that it was the only bombings were from Israel. And this is the Hannibal Directive, guys. This is public information. But if you're even for a moment trying to wonder whether the reality is they were indiscriminately bombing this entire area, and in many cases deliberately killed their own hostages. It's not hard to see what happened here. Now, if you want to know more about the background, we went over this recently a lot. I don't want to go back through it all. The point is simply that there's easy examples so far where they tried to first have full exchanges of hostages more than once. well before anybody was killed. They turned it down. Then in November 2023, they tried to return the Bibas family's bodies for free. And Israel said no and said, you're lying. And then went on to spend a year pretending like this wasn't the case. Dropsite News reports, and I wasn't able to see this today, but they're claiming it's from Channel 12 News, that Israeli captive Ela Cohen, freed by Hamas, now says he narrowly escaped the tunnel where it was held and it collapsed following an Israeli airstrike. Pretty simple. Here's a clip of them responding to, specifically, this was Daniel Levy, former Israeli peace negotiator, who's been pretty outspoken about Israel and what they're doing. He's responding about the claim that they were bringing forward. And this is, Argamani was also pointing out what she just said, but you'll see him in the clip. I forget his name. Another Israeli representative, and it's one-sided. And this was his response.
Now these times, you managed to accompany Prime Minister Netanyahu in Congress. You were on the stage for the inauguration of President Trump. Now here, thankfully safe. Your partner not yet. And it was so important to hear your testimony of an awful experience to which no human should ever be subjected, because it reminds us that at the end of the day, this is about people. Each story deeply personal, your strength in the face of adversity, the thousands upon thousands of stories of individual hardship, Israelis both fallen and still held captive, the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, many more maimed, starved, lives devastated, schools, hospitals, shelters, entire neighborhoods destroyed, and yet the remarkable resilience also of Palestinians. Dr. Hussam Abu Safir, the director of Kamal Radwan Hospital, still mistreated and held in Israeli detention. One really must not forget the names of the Bibas children, Ariel and Kafir, the circumstances of their death, nor the name of Leila Al-Khatib, a 2-year-old Palestinian killed in her home in the occupied West Bank just days ago while eating dinner with her family, or 5-year-old Hind Rajab, bombed and denied medical attention, dead with her family. Those lost in the turned-off incubators of Al-Shifa Hospital. Mm-hmm. A minute of silence for each of the Bibas children would be appropriate, as would a minute of silence for each of the more than 18,000 Palestinian children murdered in Israel's devastation of Gaza. That silence would extend to over 300 hours.
300.
And our task is to prevent that conflict and that human suffering. And it results from political conflict, preventable tragedies.
Look at this guy scrolling on his phone while he's giving this speech. That's the Israeli representative, because he doesn't care.
And the many more tragedies that await if steps are not taken. When you peel back the layers, we are all people and we are all born equal. We can and sometimes should use strong and emotive language, but what we have at the end of the day is rules, is laws, is charters, is conventions, is rights that are codified. Not what is seen in the eye of the beholder, not what is subjective, something that is supposed to, not always, is be applied and not ignored.
The point is, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to, though there's no equivocation between, well, yeah, there is. There's a law that applies to everybody. But the point is, they tried to make, okay, you can't compare the two things. The point is, you're damn right you can't. We're at a point where we're seeing hundreds of thousands killed, entire civilization destroyed. It's pretty obvious what Israel has done. And there's also very clear points to make about what happened on October 7th and the crimes within that were committed. But if you can't stand back and objectively acknowledge what they've done is monumentally more, magnitudes worse than anything that ever, and on top of the fact that a lot of what happened and most of the worst things that happened on October 7th were committed by Israel. That's been reported by Israeli media, as much as that might outrage some people listening. It's true. But of course, people like Charlie Kirk, this was yesterday. After everything that's already come out, just deflects back and says, Israel says, but that's what he's paid for. Hamas beats the babies to death. So we just repeat what they say. Here's Eva Klampas, just still shoving emotional manipulation down your throat. Ariel Bibas loved Batman. It's gross to me. So you know now, because I guarantee she does, that the evidence shows one thing, and all you keep doing is using them. using them and showing their emotional overlap, even though the family has asked you not to do this. That's really happening right now. The family, I'll show you right now, is saying, don't keep talking about, and she doesn't care because she doesn't care about them or any of them. She cares about the Israeli agenda. Aaron Mate points out, by carrying out mass murder in Gaza, Israel and its apologists have shown us their contempt for human life. That extends to Israelis. Israel enacts the Hannibal Directive to murder Israelis rather than allow them to be taken captive. And it has now bombed Israeli captives in Gaza since. To build support for mass murder in Gaza, Israel's apologists also exploit Israel victims and torment their families. They spread graphic, lurid claims about Israeli victims without evidence, almost all of which, in fact, I think literally all of it turned out to be false. All the bombastic claims about rape and torture, not a single one's proven correct after all the people have come back. And he says, as the case with the Bibas family shows, they did the same with the Hamas rape hoax, exploiting the deaths of Israeli women to paint them as rape victims without evidence. Even the main one with the gray pants and the stain, guys, it turns out they had the video from the very beginning that proved it was her ankle and her wrist. As we said, logically based on the evidence at the time. Or at the very least, that doesn't prove that we know something happened. And turns out we were right. Being objective seems to be the right path. And it says this was so egregious that the family of one slain Israeli woman, Gal Abdush, spoke out against the exploitation of her death. That's what Israel and its apologists do. From the Nazi Holocaust to October 7th, exploit death and suffering to inflict more of it against Palestinians and Israelis if need be. And what he's citing is what we reported last time. And this is very public. This is, I'll show you directly from a report. The Bibas family says Israel never officially informed them of any of the graphic allegations about them being beaten or suffocated or mutilated, all the 3 different ways it's been framed. So Israel's government is saying one thing to the world and another to the family. Now, the important part here, and this is from Scott Ritter, and I'll show you from Brave. It says, so the family of the 2 babies of the Israel government says were strangled to death has called the government narrative a lie. That's recent. This is today. And demand that the government stay away from their funeral. I showed you that a couple days ago. The Israeli government is incapable of telling the truth about anything. Now, I've already shown you this, guys. Look at the last episode we did. Times if Israel has it, I showed you. When he first got back, Bibas' father, Yarden Bibas, said he still maintained he believed the IDF bombs killed them. Which is what he said in the video, like all the other videos that have turned out to be correct, despite them now being home. Now, that evolved. The narrative came out from Daniel Hagari that the Bibas family father wanted him to say. That's never been proven. And now we find out that they didn't even relay the information to them. So how could he have possibly been able to tell them to relay it if he didn't tell them in the first place? That's the big point right there. If we now know, which we do, it's even in Israeli media, that they didn't inform them about how he was beaten, the allegation anyway, about how the children were beaten to death. How is it possible that Yarden could have said, tell them that, which is what Daniel argued? He's a liar. And in fact, the typical lazy, reactive Israeli propaganda. It's basic logic, guys. Now, today, from the Brave AI search engine, it says the Bibas family has expressed skepticism about the Israeli government's narrative regarding the fate of their children. The family has criticized the government for not providing concrete evidence to support its claims. According to the family, they are no longer willing to accept uncertainty. It says, oh, that's just about, Hamas denies that they did it, which we all know. But the point is, guys, this is currently where it's at. And I'm going to just kind of wrap this up because we've been long with, I was going to read through this in general. I'll probably go into the next show. The bottom line is this article from today, or no, the 21st, excuse me. 16 months of lies, it says. Who failed the Bibas family? It's very clear what they're saying here. That they used them. Even if you believe their narrative, they're still claiming, look, why did you let us believe they were alive for a year? Because they used them, guys. And that's what Israel's saying right now. They're saying that they abused them and used their family's name. How long have I been saying that? It's just sad that we couldn't get that awareness before. In an honest world and an honest media structure, it would have. We know that Netanyahu's been systematically foiling all the hostage talks. That's from December 7th or October 7th, 2024. We have this evidence. Haaretz also writing, Netanyahu now may exploit the ongoing crisis to nix the ceasefire, which is what we knew would happen and told you that. as all the evidence has shown since the 15th. But you won't hear this from mainstream or mainstream alternative media in the West. And here's the article I put out on the 15th where we told you this would happen. And every day since, because the evidence showed that. This is January 15th, before the ceasefire even started. The new ceasefire agreement Israel already plans to break. Now, Israel has indefinitely delayed Palestinian prisoner releases. This is as of 2 days ago. Indefinitely, that says, in case you missed it. Now, the U.S., of course, steps up and says, well, we support whatever they do, delaying this. Because that makes sense, right? Because you want this to end, but you support whatever they do, no matter. Oh, and the West Bank invasion. Well, yeah, because if you know, you've been watching the show, you know he supports that because he's the one that made the deal. That's according to Israel. And now, 1 day ago, Hamas says no Gaza ceasefire talks unless Israel releases prisoners. So the only way to look at this with any honesty is Israel has not met its last part of phase 1. Why? Because they want to blow up this deal before phase 2 as agreed. Because right now, realize, despite what they're claiming is they released them in bad ways and they made a mistake with the body, but they ultimately did give her body back. And you can still argue it was a mistake, which would make sense, but who knows? The point is that at this point, they've met every single part of their part of the agreement, even though Israel's violated the deal almost every day so far. Now, they're just going, because of what they did in the wrong way, we're going to just hold off until, there it goes. Told you this would be the passing. Now, they're saying, well, you need to finish your part of the deal or we're not going to go forward, and they're going to use that to break the deal. That's my opinion. It's hard not to see it. Now, lastly, in general, as Francesca Albanese points out, Dawn, which is a group that's been, I forget what it stands for, actually. Dawn Mina, it says, let's see, where was that? We can look into it for you. It's a group that's been trying to hold Israel accountable. And it says they filed an historic ICC referral urging an investigation into Biden, Blinken, and Austin for their complicity in Israel war crimes. Now, here's an interesting thing to point out. Shouldn't this be something that the Trump administration supports? Shouldn't this be something that Republicans support for going after the crimes of Biden? You're damn right. How much you want to bet that doesn't happen, and you'll know why. Important development, she says. Never has the international justice been at such a critical and historical crossroad. I certainly hope we see more, guys. I really do. Thank you for tuning in today. Appreciate y'all staying tuned. A lot to talk about as always, but we'll be following up. There's a lot to continue to cover. I just, as always, want you to be on guard, right? Just show discernment. Be skeptical. I don't care if left or right or Trump or Biden or anybody else. If you're honest with yourself, you know as well as I that we're not supposed to just accept at face value what especially the current government tells you. That's just stupid. We know that that's not, from journalism to just an average citizen, the whole point is we're supposed to hold their feet to the fire. Otherwise, they do whatever they want. And that seems to be what's happening right now. The whole judicial overlap to every dynamic we're seeing, we are seeing a rapid decline in anything that ever was seen as some kind of a structural aspect of why this country is supposedly better than everywhere else, even though that's not the case today. The reality is clear that they're eroding all of these things. Doesn't that kind of sound like a reimagining, a rebuilding, build back better kind of dynamic? It sure as hell does. Same with everything else they're rolling out. I just hope that you're willing to consider that might be still happening. Thank you for tuning in today. Please share the information with anybody out there that needs to see it. And as always, guys, this platform doesn't exist without you. We still need your support every day. There's far too many times where I just don't even say this, but we need to continue to, we need your support to continue. My point is that I hate even getting into it because it's just not my scene. I hate the marketing side but at the end of the day, what we're going through and what we're doing relies on you to continue. So if you believe in what we're doing, if you believe in the work we're putting out for free, show us. Demonstrate for us how much this means to you, what the value is to you. And even if that's just a letter of encouragement, that means everything to me. That's what's important. More than anything, understanding the information, learning the information, sharing it out with yourself, what you think, not what I think, what you think about the information. If it comes down between you giving $1 or $100 and looking into the information and sharing it, I prefer you look into the information and share it. That's what we're here for. Thank you for your support. Couldn't do it without you. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.